This episode of The Seen and the Unseen is brought to you by Intel. Two roads diverged in a wood, and you took the one you're passing through. Why do we take the paths we take in our lives? For some of us, it's social convention and inertia. When I was growing up in the 1980s, good middle class boys were supposed to be engineers and doctors, and maybe do that newfangled thing in MBA, certainly try for UPSC. Why not just go along? Some of us manage to ignore these conventions and find that golden intersection between doing something we love, something we are good at, and something we can get paid for. But whatever choice we make, there's usually some rationale behind it. Maybe a steady career, maybe a pot of gold if we get to the end of the rainbow, maybe an artistic satisfaction that can't be measured only in banknotes. But some people, they go against the tide and make choices that seem destined not to work. Your enemies laugh at you, your friends feel sorry for you, but you gotta do what you gotta do. As the great Kashinath Singh wrote in Kashi Ka Assi, Bhar mein jaye dunya, hum bajaye harmonia.
Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen, our weekly podcast on economics, politics, and behavioral science. Please welcome your host, Amit Varma.
Let the world go to hell. I will play my harmonium. Welcome to The Seen and the Unseen. My guest today is Abhinandan Sekhri, the founder and CEO of News Laundry. Abhinandan joined the news industry as a journalist with Newstrack, a video news magazine that circulated by video cassette long before the internet existed. His career took many unconventional routes after that. He was an assistant director on Meera Nair's film Monsoon Wedding. He jumped into making travel shows for television when there was no market for travel shows on television. He started an NGO with Arvind Kejriwal and Manish Sisodia, among others, at a time when they were all unknown and such activism seemed doomed to failure. He wrote comedy for television while the world went to hell around him, and eventually he formed News Laundry, a media house with a difference. They would ignore advertisers and subsist directly off the goodwill of their readers. Today, everyone is talking about this as a new trend in the creator economy. Abhinandan and his team have been doing this for a decade. When I invited him on the show and he agreed, I didn't have to do much digging about what kind of person he is. One thing I love about Abhinandan is that what you see is what you get. His public persona has no filters. I love that about him. Before recording this episode, we were chatting about Akar Patel's delightful tweets, and I pointed out that Akar has become a personification of the phrase, no more fucks to give. Akar is fearless in a way that most of us can only admire from a distance. I felt Abhinandan had reached that state as well, but he told me nope, he still has some way to go. Be that as it may, he's a fearless crusader for a better India. And in times when the rest of the media seems to have sold itself out, News Laundry continues to speak truth to power. Many of us admire this, but we should also put our money where our mouth is. If you agree, head on over to newslaundry.com/subscription and support News Laundry. You can even get a 25% discount if you write to Abhinandan at an email ID he reveals at the end of the show. But I would say, ignore the discount, pay the full price. Pay to keep news free. Now, if that sounds like a commercial, it isn't. The commercial comes now. How secure are we? In general, we are not as secure as we think. We rely on the state for the rule of law, but across the world, states tend to be predators rather than protectors. We do get some security that comes from social trust and conventions, but that can work both ways. One place where we are relatively secure, though, is the internet. I often speak of technology with hope, as it empowers individuals and it also protects them. And it does it so well and in such an unseen way that we often take it for granted. There's no better example of this than the sponsor of this episode, Intel. Devices powered by Intel help businesses stay connected and secure and provide them performance and stability. Intel's 11th Gen vPro platform has layers of security that go beyond software with advanced threat detection and comprehensive multi-level security features. No one will mess with you if you have Intel by your side. The Intel vPro platform, built for business wherever business happens. Abhinandan, welcome to The Seen and the Unseen.
Thank you, Amit. Pleasure to be here.
So it's interesting, I realized while looking up your bare biographical details that we are the same age. You're both 47, though I'll get to 48 before you, so I'll be a step ahead. And although we have sort of had orthogonal careers in the media, in journalism, and all of that. I actually don't know much about you, and I'm not even sure how much we really have in common, even though we've almost had, parallel lives in Delhi and Bombay. And I was in Delhi for a very brief while, but
I was in Bombay for a very brief while.
there you go. Yeah. And I've also worked in television, and I've also been a journalist, and we both do podcasts, all of that. So I want to know a little bit more about the non-public persona. Like if somebody searches for your name, you're all over. And one of the delightful things that I kind of like about everything I've seen of yours and whatever is that what you see is what you get. You're just putting yourself out there. So one gets a sense that there is a public persona of Abhinandan Sekhri, and hey, everybody knows that. I'm sure a lot of people must have told you that they feel a sense of familiarity with you when they meet you because they're so used to watching you. But take me before that, like where did you grow up? What was your childhood like? What kind of a boy were you?
Well, I went through, I'd say, two distinct phases as a boy. I had a very idyllic small town childhood. Malguri days of the north, kind of. Dehradun was a small town where everybody walked. The only time your car came out was if you were going to the club, one of those evenings. My dad was a Fauji, my mother was a school teacher. And Dehradun was a town for retired people and Faujis and teachers and schools. And I'm talking like the 70s and 80s. So there weren't as many schools as there are now. There were no red lights in Dehradun till even the late 90s. It's just after Uttarakhand was made and became a capital, it became anything. So, and when dad was in the army, before he took premature retirement, because mum was a teacher in Welham Girls' School, we were allowed to be educated at the Doon School. So it was like a quota kind of. So especially when many people who like me have got the benefit of quota, don't realize we are quota kids. And when they grow up and they're doing really well, they say, bloody, what is this quota? I was like, can I use F words here on your show?
Of course, please.
Okay. I was like, fucker, you're a quota kid. What the fuck you are? You would have been nothing had it not been for a quota. So, I went to Welham Boys School from class 1 to 6 and then Doon 7 to 12. And in fact, my grandfather used to teach Tamil and English at Doon. But that's much before I was born. So our family's been in Dehradun for a long time. Mother is a Tamilian, my father's a Punjabi. But during the holidays, my dad was in the army, so he was posted to, Siliguri or Bhopal or Mathura. So you spend a lot of time in cantonments, which meant air rifles. And now when I think of it, maybe that's how we've turned out so screwed up. I would never let my nephew go with an air gun to shoot squirrels and chameleons and birds, but that's what we did, because cantonments are safe. The rule was you had to get back home when lights are on. So you'd go to the bushes, you'd go to the thicket, you'd catch, in little rasna bottles, we'd catch tadpoles and then watch them grow. In Hajmola bottles, catch caterpillars, watch them become pupas and then butterflies. And even Dehradun was like that. You could go in. There was no fear ki bhai bachcha kahan. Like from the time I was 6 or 7, I could walk anywhere I wanted. My folks weren't worried. So yeah, it was an idyllic childhood, and school was, although I was a day scholar till I was in class 9 because I was allowed to be, although both Welham and Doon are all boarding. Because my mother was a teacher, I was allowed to go back home in the evenings. It was fun. It was, I was a kind of, I won't say I was shy, but I was a quieter kid till I was maybe 12 or 13. After which I became an aggressive boy. I was very tiny. I was much smaller than all my batchmates. I was way, way smaller. So I guess you compensate for that by being extremely aggressive, because even, a boarding school, it's like prison rules. If you don't push back, to compensate for size, if, you do if you fuck with me, I'm going to give you such a tongue lashing and humiliate you in front of everybody. So that's how you get a bit aggressive. So now when I look back, I'd like to not have been that aggressive when I was in my teens. But those are the two. But yeah, before that I was very quiet and retiring. I have 2 older sisters. So in any case, I was used to being quiet. One is 6 years older, one was 3 years older. And Dehradun was, kite flying, going for those jhankis of Ram Leela, watching the Ravan thing from the club lawns. And you were the youngest because all my sister's friends are much older than me. So you were the sidekick who ran behind the gang. No one really was looking out for you. So yeah, it was a good. I mean, I'd say it was a very peaceful, happy childhood.
Yeah, I've seen pictures on your Instagram of your school years, I think, where, there's one picture of a group of you and someone makes a comment about which one is you, but I could make out you're kind of in the center, you're the same kind of face. And there's another one where there are, one, two, three, it's like a vertical picture, people leaning on each other and you're the kid at the bottom. And you mentioned sort of like one of the things that I remember not just having in school, but kind of for much longer, and I think people have it throughout their lives, is sort of the anxiety of fitting in, where you're still kind of discovering who you are in a sense, as if that process is ever complete. But that's sort of a dominant anxiety for many people. At one level, the anxiety of fitting in, at another level, the anxiety of what people will think of you, which drives sometimes the things that you do, the music you listen to and the music you pretend to listen to, and
Right.
the books you carry around and the books you really enjoy reading, and so on and so forth. And a lot of these things about myself, I realized only later through looking back, through self reflection and all of that. And it seems you've also kind of done a little bit of that because you just use the phrase now when I look back, So tell me a little bit about, when you look back at the young Abhinandan, like what were those anxieties? When did you lose those anxieties? Where does that process come if it is complete? And I think it's complete for you. And I think I kind of took a long time to get there, but where does it happen where you get comfortable in your own skin?
Well, I mean, I would say there wasn't a time, it wasn't an event. It's more a process, like the pupa turning
Yeah,
into a
yeah,
butterfly kind of
absolutely.
thing. But yeah, I'd say maybe late 20s, early 30s onwards, I was, pretty sure of my confidence levels was solid. It wasn't a put on confidence which you have when you're in your 20s. Like you said,
Yeah.
what is expected of you is like, and I was always confident. And I'll get into the reason why that is, when we get into this a little bit. But the real confidence, I guess, only in your 30s is when it kind of starts to develop. Like stuff like I love Punjabi music, right? So if I was going to pick up a girl, or I would switch to English music, right up to your late 20s or 30s. Now I don't give a shit. I was like, fuck, I listen to Geeta Zelda. Like, before you want to sit, sit. You don't want to sit, don't sit. So those kind of things, take a little longer. But I mean, yeah, that's when it happened, and I think Delhi has a lot to do with it. Because when I was young, when you're talking about the anxieties, one is of course your middle class, and the way middle class is used. It's, let's face it, I was privileged even though I was not a Nikhil Nanda or Jyotiraditya Scindia, but I was still more privileged than 90% of the country. But because our society has been so, segmented, that you're the bottom of the top. So stuff like not being able to afford the shoes that others could, not being able to afford a Nike, you wear Power. It kind of bites you a little self-conscious about it. But luckily it was never a big thing for me because my folks, I mean, that was a new thing of what brand I was wearing only when I, in my teens. Before that, because of the kind of people my parents are, I was never even aware that there was anything other than what we have. One is because there was no cable TV, so you didn't know. B, that wasn't a priority in our house, so you didn't know anyway. And there was never any shame. Like, my mother comes from a family of teachers and academics. Like, my aunts have been teachers, my mother's a teacher, my grandfather's a teacher. And they were the typical Tamilians who really charto a lot of books. We had a lot of books at home. Like, we had more books than anything else, basically. You may have a broken sofa, but your books were, kept well. So there was never really that need. But I did go through a phase, I'd say, in my teens to college, where you were aware that you don't have as much as the other kids who you grew up with. But honestly, it did not impact me as much as it impacted others around that I saw, because there were a lot of us who were service kids and a lot of us who were, very wealthy. So it did impact me a little bit, but not enough for it to take a knock on my confidence. I would be self-conscious about it and sometimes a little embarrassed, but not enough to not speak out. So yeah, and I think for that, I'd say, my mom and my sisters are. I mean, I do think I'm not married and I don't have kids, but it's funny coming from me. I think the unit of family, I mean, for all my progressive and bohemian choices and angles in life. From my experience, I'll say if you have a solid family, you can be so fucking confident that no one can shake that confidence. Because no matter what I did, for my mother, I was always the star.
Yeah.
I'm always the star. Even now, she says, internet pe kuch chalata hoga type, and I have two older sisters. They're both really smart, bright, very independent. So confidence was something that I saw and learned. So I was conscious that I'm not as well off as many of the kids I'm growing up with. And sometimes I was embarrassed because like your car doesn't have an AC, your car may break down. I have a second-hand Fiat, which was like 40,000 rupees. And at that time, Maruti 800s had just come out. So people had Maruti 800. Some who were rich had Mercedes. And you're going for a friend's party who lives in this big bungalow in South Delhi somewhere. And, his probably one wheel of his car is worth your car. So that, but otherwise, me and another friend of mine were both service background. So we'd always say, our dads couldn't give us a BMW, but give us a car. That's even if it didn't work half the time, which is more than what a lot of others get. But yeah, so I mean, that kind of, it vanished early enough for me for it to, and even today, money is not a motivation in my life. I want a, fairly comfortable life and I want choices, but you see how I dress, my entire wardrobe must be worth 20,000 rupees. I don't give a fuck about that shit. That's never been an issue. But it was when I was young. I tell, many of my younger peers this, that when I wanted to buy expensive stuff, I couldn't afford it. So basically, God outwits you. He gives you what you want, but not when you want it.
Yeah.
And when he gives it to you, you don't want it.
Yeah.
So I was very, keen to buy, shoes, Keds that were expensive. Back then, Air Jordans and shit. I couldn't afford them. Now I may not be able to buy a Rolls, but I can buy any shoe I want. But I don't have anything other than juttis and, my one pair of Keds. I used to love the Harley Davidson boots because I'd seen friends of mine wear it. And a pair of Harley Davidson boots at that time was like 8,000, 7,000. I'm talking like 90s, man. That was like, when I was a news track, my salary was $3,500. So, when you can afford it, you just want Kolhapuri chappals and a kurta pajama. So yeah.
I mean, maybe the mindset of not wanting things is also a kind of richness. You mentioned the books that surrounded you in your house and, how it didn't matter if the sofa was broken, the books were all around. And my childhood was similar to that, extremely privileged. My dad was a civil servant, surrounded by books all the time. And that's what I remember. So my dad passed away earlier this year and we just sold his house and I have to go there next month to clear out some of the stuff.
Where is that?
This is in Chandigarh. Okay. And the thing that I think about most is books, because all those books, and I've got to find someone to give it away to, some library or charity or whatever. And all those books, in a sense, are my nursery. They are kind of what shaped me, because as a kid, I just sort of grew up just reading all the time and in different ways, sort of forming my imaginative world there, and kind of starting from there. What was it like for you? Because, you mentioned your mother was also an academic. Her whole side of the family was academics. They were all obviously into reading. Reading must have been both something sacred and at the same time a source of great pleasure for all of you. So tell me a little bit about what kind of stuff you read. And of course, we had, a limited variety of books in general available. So kids would grow up reading the same thing. Even the serious reading they would progress to would be, I'm sure there are lots of commonalities, but give me a sense of how that was shaping you.
A lot of what you read at that time was because you heard your mother say, oh, this is very good. So you read it and you didn't really have a view of what's good or bad. You just read. So my mother had this big collection, she still does, of P.G. Wodehouse and Jeeves and all that. So you went through those before you really could understand them. Like now when I think back, I mean, I don't think 13, 14-year-old should be reading those, especially someone who has no insight or idea of British humor or British life or British society. There's a lot of that subtext and that's the world it's in. But you read it because you heard your mother say, oh, how fine, haha, in it. But so you read it. The other thing that my folks had was they had all the Reader's Digests because they used to subscribe from like 72 onwards. They were all... So I got operated for appendicitis when I was in class 8. So I had to, be in bed for about 10, 12 days. And during that time, I chartered, I think from 72, 73 onwards, all the Reader's Digests. Wow. So, whether it's, that drama in real life used to be
Humor
one
in
segment.
uniform must have
Humor in
appealed to you.
uniform, college humor, laughter the best medicine. And of course, there was drama in real life. And there used to be this, the long walk home type. Later, I got to know there was a certain Christian angle to the Reader's Digest. So all these stories had a certain message about there being a God and you should be good. And it was subliminal. Of course, it didn't convert me to Christianity in case everyone wants to go and, attack the Reader's Digest. But later I understood that there was a certain politics behind that as well. But I charted all that. Then you try to pick up stuff that is way beyond your league, like War and Peace and Thornbirds, which used to be this thick book. I remember it was
Colin McCullough, I remember that, yeah.
So, you pick those up, you abandon those halfway, but you learn something, you learn English words. Then there was a lot of Thomas Hardy, which I would still recommend that, I wouldn't recommend it to someone your and my age because there's a certain, I don't mean Tess and Jude the Obscure, which are very depressing, but, Return of the Native or Far from the Madding Crowd, there's a certain Yash Chopra-esqueness to his books. There's the hero and there's the Evelyn Bathsheba, she's vain. And then, she falls in love with someone and then, the other guy comes and, saves her and then there's some tragedy. So, I think Thomas Hardy was, the thinking man's Yash Chopra. So, those kind of books are there. So you appreciated at a younger age. And I still would recommend them to people who are young because I think there's a lot. There's a feel-good factor. You learn something. He writes well. It's a story well told. Then, of course, you had she had all those classics, Leo Tolstoy and Dickens, Shakespeare. In fact, we still have some of, those ones which have that orange with the gold emboss, the books I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So I still have those lying. You don't have the heart to throw them. Although when my mom sold a house in Dehradun and, moved to Delhi because here there was a flat, the books couldn't fit here. So we gave a lot of them away. That was pretty heartbreaking. I would have loved to get them all because you can't accommodate those books in an apartment, which you could in a bungalow in Dehradun. So yeah, that was the kind of stuff. And my sister, I've even read Mills and Boons, because my sister went through the Mills and Boons phase. So it was lying there, you read it, of course, they'd laugh at you, but you read it. But, like when you grow up with two sisters much older than you get bullied a lot. Like, you get bashed really badly because I don't know whether it's gendered to say this now, but with their girls, they can beat you, they will not get into trouble. Yeah. If you're an older brother and you hit his younger sister, I'm sure the parents will whack you. But, as my older sisters and I was much tinier, so
they're going to listen to this and they're going to whack you again.
Yeah. And then stuff do, cruel things like paint your nails. And then you don't know how to get it off because, you're like 6, 7. You try to wash it off and it doesn't come off. And then you have to go to school the next day. And I'm like, fuck, man.
What do you do? Did that happen to you?
So, yeah, that happened to me. And I was so angry. I cried and said, hey. And, class 1, 2 in an all-boys school,
So what happened in school?
They said, what the fuck you wearing? Are ladki hai, tu ladki hai type shit. So then, of course, my mom took it off when I went back. So you shit like that happens. So you pick up their books, you learn, But one thing about growing up with two older sisters is you have a richer and a better sense of what is appropriate and what is not. That's the upside of having a bruised face and nails on your... but... yeah, I'd say that was... And there was a lot of kite flying, I remember, in Dehradun. I used to fly kites. It was fun.
What did you want to be at this point in time? What did you want to be when you grow up? And, did you, for example, ever have any inkling of the career you would go on to have? Did you want to write because you read so much? Or were you just going with the flow and not really thinking too hard?
I wasn't really thinking. And also, you're the same age as I am. There were not options that were there. Like, one said, "Acha, kya banna chahte?" जो भी नौकरी मिलेगी ले लेना बेटा औकात तुम्हारी नहीं है ये सोचने की. So I was in that zone. There was a time when in class 11 you read Fountain and you want to be an architect, which is like a dumb thing to do, but I guess I went through that phase and I actually did. I'm not just saying that as a cliche. Now when someone tells me that Ayn Rand is their favorite, I'm like, not at my age. Maybe if you're a teen,
maybe for 7.
So but I honestly had no idea. I stumbled into journalism and I'll tell you how. I had no idea what I wanted to be. But one thing I remember very early in life at the back of my head was that I want to do something on my own. I don't want to be, reporting to a boss. That I had articulated a few times, but then I shut up because तेरी औकात नहीं है बोलने की. So I would just keep. But I remember that was a key. That was the only thing that I
Why
knew.
did you feel like that? I mean, can you put a finger on it, or?
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think my college years were completely Ankush free. There was no one watching over me. My sisters were either in Bombay or abroad, and I was pretty much my parents weren't really with me here at the time, and I was a bit adrift in college. I was like, no one was there to ask me, "Have you gone to class? Have you not gone to class?" So I was doing what the fuck I wanted to do.
This was Hansraj, you were doing
Hansraj,
economics.
econ. My second year, I remember this thing was zero, my attendance. And those days you could get the admit card by one old monk. Bottle was enough to get your admit card even if you didn't have the attendance. So, I mean, I think at that phase, I was at my rebellious worst. I don't know what
Peak.
yeah,
Neutral
at peak,
term.
yes.
Yeah.
Let's keep it neutral. It was in a good or bad way. And at that time, I think that those years formed my personality to a great extent. And then I think I had become a kind of person who I knew would not like survive in a job for very long. In the long run, I would need to do something on my own. I mean, that's all I can answer.
I guess because of the rebelliousness and all of
Rebelliousness and yeah, you just felt that I have some, I want to do something that is not this or that. It'll be something else.
But that something else was vague at the time.
It was vague. I didn't know. I mean, when I was in college, in fact, I wrote a few articles for a magazine called Parenting here.
Okay.
It used to be a magazine for parenting.
What did you write for them?
I wrote book reviews.
Oh, okay, that's cool.
So, I mean, while I was in college, I had a huge, I used to read a lot because you have a lot of time. I had a lot of friends because of my sisters who were really smart, intelligent, cerebral people. And there I wasn't a talker, I was a listener. Because in any case, when you have sisters 6 years older than you, you are not expected to talk. So you just listen. So I absorbed a lot. And I knew what to read, what to pick. And in college, I was the talker. And there, the people who I was hanging out with weren't, they would not be even allowed into the circle that my sister hung with. It was Mandi House, theatre, that kind of. These are the people who've gone to fights in college, who the police would drag. And I mean, DU today is a very tame version of Delhi University of the 90s. I've seen such horrible fights which used to happen between Hindu college and Khalsa, and the Kirodimal guys would come and bash up someone in the Hindu hostel, and then 50 guys would march out and bash up 10 other people. So, I had friends in the hostel there. Fuck a book, they wouldn't even fucking read a magazine.
Yeah.
So that was where I had a bunch of friends like that in college. So it was this, and I appreciated them, I liked them. It taught you survival. I mean, one thing I'll say is Delhi University, I don't know what it's like today, because I believe now you have to get an ID card to get in.
Oh.
But if you've seen Rang De Basanti, what I liked about Rang De Basanti was a very accurate reflection of DU. Like, the DJ guy, Amir Khan. Like, when we were in college, you were like 18, 19, 17-year-old. There used to be 35-year-old guys who'd been hanging out in college for the last 10, 12 years. In fact, they used to, some of them in the Jubilee Hall, they had their wives and all. So they were 35-year-old. And DJ, when he says that you're already in your mid-30s, what are you still doing hanging out in college with us? He says, yahan DJ ki koi auqaat hai. So I've known many guys like that, which is why Rakesh Mehra's, and he's a DU product. I knew many guys, and it's so sad when you look back at them now. I mean, I've bumped into someone from my DU days, and they don't come from backgrounds like you and I. Like I said, we may not have been rich, but we are privileged.
Yeah.
Just the privilege of confidence is a big thing. Yeah, when you have already 2,000 books at home is more than what people have all their lives. So, I mean, you're talking about people who are from, I mean, I don't want to get into locality names, but a Basti type locality in North Delhi, where, forget a broken down Fiat, there is no chance of a car. in DU, even if, and I don't want to take too many names to embarrass those here, but there is a very prominent industrial house in Delhi. I've seen that boy get walloped in the middle of Hindu college by this one guy who would probably be socially at that guy's driver's level. And then him come the next day with his cousin and say, Amit bhai, maaf kar do, what can we do for you? Now, Amit bhai must have been like 10 years older than us, maybe 14. But he would never leave college because outside college, he was the son of a driver. There, a guy who drove a Mercedes would come and touch his feet. So he never would leave college. So DU really makes you survive. That's why DU is a very aggressive place. But I think it teaches you a lot. It teaches you survival. It taught me survival. It taught me how to get on with anybody. It taught me to get on with the Chandraval, goons. It taught me to kind of hold my own, not get, don't get into combat, but don't back off either because then they'll fucking eat you up. Make it known that I'm not going to attack you, but you may wallop me, but I will create a scene in the canteen. That may compromise your... So, it teaches you these survival in the forest kind of thing. So, I think that shaped a lot of me, when I was a teen and growing up. And because in Delhi, and also you come from Dehradun, right? I was in Dehradun from the time I was born to the time I was in 12th. You come to Delhi where suddenly it matters, who you are. One of the reasons it didn't matter, because in Dehradun it didn't fucking matter. Yeah. Even if you had a lot of money, you could do nothing with it. You still would walk and, catch gilharis and tadpoles. You'd still go to the same Doon Club and watch Ravan burning on the Sahara. That was the biggest time of on New Year's. Would still be in Doon Club with the dance floor would shake and all the kids would run around and do kalabaji type things, But suddenly here, there was wealth. It was 92, reforms had just kicked in from everybody having ambassadors and Fiats or no car. Now there were Maruti 800s coming. There was 118 NE was one of the premium cars at that time. Yeah. So I think a combination of all these changes kind of made me feel ki boss kuch apna hi karna hai. I don't want to be reporting to anybody.
And you mentioned earlier that in school, to kind of survive there, to do your thing, your strategy was to be aggressive, and you kind of regret that later. And here you said that in college, the strategy, it was a fine dance, obviously, but you learned how to get along with people. Like, what was that aggression like in school, for example? And
I had a good vocabulary. I could construct a sentence quickly. My mind was... quick. I was a funny guy back then. I wrote satire and humor for a long time. I'm still considered a funny guy by many people. Although I think a lot of my jokes are uncle jokes. The youngsters in office tell me that your jokes are very uncle jokes.
That's very rude. Yeah,
but like if someone would, I'd feel this guy is at the back of his mind, he may threaten me. I had a lot of friends. We had we were a pack, So that was one kind of insulation from anyone trying to bully me. The second was I was extremely cutting and nasty when I would like rip through someone. And I would make sure I do it during toy time when everyone's sitting and studying. So, I'd say, you just be nasty. You just say things. And when you're like 13, 14 and you're humiliated like that in front of people, you start crying. And when someone starts crying, say, oh, look, he's crying, wuss, fucking wuss, you big ass oaf. Why the fuck you crying? You do shit like that. But then you know that this guy is not going to pick on you next. He'll pick on someone else. Because he may wallop you, but you've humiliated him in the middle of. So those are the kind of survival devices you use. You don't dissect them when you're young.
Obviously.
You only dissect them now. You figure, why the fuck was that such a dick, man? Why was that so mean to that guy? But it was a sense of, let's make an example of him so the next guy does not pick on me.
And you meet some of those guys now? Like, what is it like? Like, have you ever met someone who you made cry or vice versa? And is it there the shared understanding that what happened in Vegas stays in Vegas, sort of?
Yeah, it is. We had our 25th anniversary back school reunion in 2018, I think it was. Yeah, 2018 or no, 2017 or 18. 17, sorry, yeah. So actually one of the guys I met after a long time, he's a lawyer, and I met him when I was at Newstrike and CP, and he was like, now this is what I mean. Sometimes you don't even do it knowing who you're doing it to. So I said, hey, what's up? He said, what's up? He says, I'm studying law, because that time I had started working when I was in my third year college. So I was like, let's grab lunch and CP. And we're eating, and I had nothing. I mean, I wasn't a friend of this guy's back in school, but but after school, because at Doon you're just like 70 guys a batch.
Yeah,
so you know everybody pretty, and you've spent 6 years with them, because no one can join like an 8th, 9th. You have to join from the 7th onwards. So you know each other pretty well. You're close. So he said that, damn, it's good to sit and have lunch with you, because I couldn't stand you in school. And I was stunned. I said, but why? Like, I never did anything or said anything to you in school. And he explained to me that, he says, no, you didn't. But you did this to so-and-so in front of me. I was really mean. And I was like, okay, point. But I said, I didn't say anything to you. He says, no, but that was enough for me not to like you. So you figure stuff out after that. But no, it's not. But like I said, I wasn't like, I mean, I wouldn't say I'd pick on anyone. That would happen. Raat gai, baat gai. Tomorrow I would, play basketball, football with the same guy. It's not a problem. Even now I don't hold grudges. I could have a spat with someone, and tomorrow I really don't care. It's gone. I'm happy to start again. But you realize that some people do keep that in mind for a while, but it's not so much that there's any animosity with anybody. I mean, in fact, one of the guys I didn't really like when I was in school, I used to find him really a nasty piece of work, and we had one of those, little gang battles in school. I got dengue in 1999, and it was, that time it was new fashion. It wasn't as common as it is now. It had just come in, and it was a dengue I don't know how to pronounce it, when you hemorrhage.
Yeah.
So I hemorrhaged from my nose, and I wouldn't stop bleeding. So for 2 days, and my platelet count had gone down to like some 22,000, 18,000. It was going that low, and you don't clot. So I needed 4 units of platelets every day. And those days, all these fancy hospitals weren't there. So there were 2 places where you got platelets separator. One was the Red Cross, and one was some fancy place. And we could only afford the Red Cross because it was free. But you had to go with the person who's going to give you blood. They'd give blood. Saath ke saath, they'd separate platelets. They'd give you the platelets. So I needed 4 every day for 4 days. So that's 16 people. And my sister would go there, and, she'd call up my friends. And that's when I realized, family and friends are worth more than it's a cliche, and I'm sure people say it and maybe don't mean it. I fucking absolutely swear by that. The source of confidence, that the confidence comes from family and friends. You can't get from money. You can't get from anything else.
And this guy came. He was one of the guys.
So this guy who couldn't stand. So every day my sister would come and say, I said, who all gave today? So and so. So she was like, she took his name. I was like, what the fuck? He said, yeah. And he came with 4 people, and he was doing really well. He's one of the most successful guys of our batch. And she said he came with 4 guys from his office. He made them come with him. And she said it was so sad because, and that's when she told me you should really thank God for your friends, because when I was there were a lot of people who needed platelets at the time. There were people who needed 4 units, but they could only get 1. And she says, for you, there'd be like 10 guys there. And I'd say, we only need 4. 6 of you go back, come tomorrow. Wow. So a lot of the other people would say, can 2 of yours please give to us, because we don't have 4 people here. So I remember that 3 people who gave me blood at the time, and I was like, I called him. I said, dude, why do you come? Because even though you are not friends, there's enough betakalluf, there's enough informality to say, why the fuck do you come? We aren't even friends. You can say that without it being mean or malicious, because you've grown up together. Yeah, you knew who, when it was that you saw your first porn, when it was that you discovered, you know everything about everyone, because in a boarding school, that's how it is.
Yeah.
He was like, no, dude, you fucking, one of our batchmates said that you had, and I was like, fuck that. I mean, for that, of course I'm going to come. So you realize that, these little things, you should just, it's not worth carrying them.
So when you look back at that, and, even I sort of look back on my past and the person I was, and I sometimes wonder how someone who knew me in my 20s can be friends with me today. And that is also one reason that I don't like to be quick to judge other people. Right? Today we live in an age where everybody is so judgmental, especially, and I think social media has made that worse, where it's almost as if by picking on some random thing somebody says, by standing in judgment over them, in a sense, you're showing how virtuous you are. So we are no longer willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe so-and-so meant something else. Maybe it was a weak moment. Maybe they did this then, but they're a different person now. And I just think that we contain multitudes, we're always changing, and we are all essentially the same. At the end of the day, it's an accident of, nature and nurture and whatever happens to you and all of that, that kind of makes us be different people and do different things. Like, what do you think about that aspect of things? Because you are also very active on social media, perhaps even more than me. And this is something that I kind of find disturbing, because especially on Twitter, shitter, what you kind of get is that everyone is kind of signaling, and that requires this extreme kind of aggression, always shitting on people, not even, like one of the sort of mottos of any group I'm part of is assume goodwill. Right? You begin, that is a default, you assume goodwill. If somebody does something wrong, it's okay to assume that it's a mistake. What is sort of your sense of that? Because I find young people rushing to judgment, rushing to hardened positions. And those hardened positions, in fact, are saved forever on social media. Like, if some of the stuff I wrote or thought when I was 20,
yeah.
or
Imagine,
you
dude,
for that matter,
if those,
there would be screenshots of that today.
if those moments were stored in posterity, like, I'd be cancelled.
We'd be
long
cancelled
ago.
a million times over, right? And I just feel that somehow in this performative age, in this angry age, that space to grow for young people isn't there. What are your sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah. This is something that I think about a lot. And I don't mind think by default, actively think about what is it that drives this on social media. Even my behavior on social media has evolved. I got onto Twitter because during the Jan Lokpal movement, it was a new thing, and because we needed more traction, we were using this kya kehte hain,
The missed
SMS,
calls thing, yeah.
SMS, and then the Sibbal and Chidambaram, they blocked it that you couldn't do. Then we had to. So that's how I got on Twitter. And in fact, that time, Arvind also got on Twitter at that time, and everybody said, okay, everyone, this is something that can be used. And now, then the Jan Lokpal movement turned into so at that time there was a lot of this about Lokpal, debates, and it was all about that. It was more a tool. Because I wasn't really a social media friendly kind of guy. It's not something that comes naturally to me. Then when you're on it, there's that slight headiness that, oh dude, I've got so many followers. Because I'm a fucking bloody prime time talking shit every night. Of course you'll get followers. Like, I still see people our age who get a kick out of that.
Yeah.
And I feel really bad for them. I mean, I went through that because I was new on Twitter. It was a new thing. You suddenly had a lot of followers. People were saying nice things to you because, that time it was fashionable to, support the Jan Lokpal movement. And we can get into that later because I know you can't stand Arvind, and, we should talk about that. And so that was one phase. Then, kind of News Laundry started around the same time, 2012. And then I would, if someone said something, I would really rip into them on Twitter. And you'll see, I've gone to a lot of scraps with people, and it was this, there was no filter. You just, that Times magazine has done a cover story on the online disinhibition syndrome. So I was a victim of the online disinhibition syndrome. And then after that, I don't now respond to trolls. Once in a while, if I'm sitting villa at night, I may respond to one or two, but otherwise I don't even. So I must have muted thousands of people because, they'll say something. Back in 2012, I would have responded to each one. Now I don't. I'll respond to one and it'll be a strategic response. I'll be responding for a reason. That may not be apparent, but there is a reason I'm responding to this particular one. I always respond to compliments. Thank you. Subscribe, pay to keep news free. I keep hammering that in. I always thank those people. Now, taking a position. And now, because of this, now we grew up in an internet-free age. I mean, even with Newstrack, there was no internet. Internet just come in as emails. That, that shit. So we knew it existed, but no one fucking used it. It was...
That sound reminds me, you'd have half a Samantha Fox picture download and while the other half is coming, that noise in the background.
Now, the thing is that, I mean, to give you an example, my position on the death penalty has taken maybe 10 years to evolve. I mean, I firmed up my position on the death penalty, I think in my early 40s or maybe when I was 40. But right from my late 20s to my, late 30s, it was evolving based on what I read, what I heard. What people end up doing, and they don't have to, they take a very firm position, which is not thought through. And because you have taken that position, it's that cognitive dissonance ka jo podcast hai, that because you've said hum keh diye, now I have to fucking defend it no matter what.
Exactly.
And you paint yourself into a corner that leads to anxiety. Now again, some of the stuff I'm going to say on your podcast, I mean, I get a lot of, I won't say hate, because they're very affectionately written letters, because a lot of News Laundry subscribers say that, dude, your views on gender and on wokeness are really problematic. And some of them have convinced me, some haven't. I must say they try to reason me very politely, and that's very sweet of them. So I do have some views that some of your woke audience may not find. Like, now I'm not saying it's not a problem. I'm sure it is. But everyone, okay, not everyone. Too many people I know who are young have anxiety. I can't do this, I have anxiety. We can't do this on that day. I have to see my therapist. I have anxiety. One is, you should have anxiety. You can't go through life with a sense of Buddha-like equilibrium. You will have very anxious moments when wait till you fucking get dumped. Then you'll know when you get that twing feeling in your stomach, The second is, I think it's because of social media. I have to check myself. Like, I don't have the Twitter app on my phone. But sometimes if something happens, there's a news cycle where News Laundry is involved, I have to tell myself, dude, stop fucking looking at your phone. You keep looking. Ab kuch bolun, ab kuch dalun, ab kuch karun, ab kuch respond karun. And I've realized that causes anxiety. So it is not the kids' fault. They have grown in an age where there is this one ingredient that is a standalone anxiety machine that they're growing up with. Now, that is something that a lot of kids these days face. And by kids, I'm talking 20s even. And a lot of them take very committed positions because of this wanting to be a part of the woke police, or, oh, how dare you? Like, okay, maybe my view on gender, or, yeah, guys, you got to understand, we grew up at a time when the term faggot was considered okay. I mean, think about that. It has taken some undoing. I mean, we grew up at a time where in our textbook, there was and this is an ICSE textbook where I know it's against the law to use the Jatav community. There's a slang associated with the Jatav community, which Mayawati belongs to. That slang that is associated with the Jatav community was a part of that short story in our textbook. I mean, that's what we're talking about. So, of course, a lot of my views have evolved, like on gender. Like, I didn't get this whole gender fluidity. Like, I mean, even now, a guy wearing nail varnish, I guess it may be childhood trauma because
Self-loathing coming
out. Or, my immediate response, I do stiffen up a little bit, but I understand that's a fucked up primitive response. But because you're wrong on some things, you aren't wrong on everything. And the wokeness is like, fuck, everything is a theorem. It's not. Yeah. Only mathematical theorems are mathematical theorems. Everything else is in the grays, and it'll evolve. So that is something that of social media, where you take a very firm position, and because you've taken it and written it, now you got to keep defending it, is what leads to anxiety. It leads to, I mean, it would be interesting to see what this generation looks like in their 40s. I mean, we are still dealing with the first generation of social media kids. I mean, I think they'll be very different people from pre-social media. Like in India, there are the pre-lib kids and the post-lib kids. Worldwide, there'll be the pre-social media kids and the post-social media kids. And I think it's going to be a very different personality. I don't know whether it'll be better or worse, good or bad, but the impact it'll have on them is enormous. And at least till now, I don't think overall in a good way, but we may be being the uncles. Beta, ye bahut galat cheez hai, ye TV. Like, if you read Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, a lot of what he said was very true and sensible, but most of it hasn't turned out to be true.
So I agree with you, but just because this is too dark a vision and one wants to, though I'm normally the pessimist in the room, but the counterpoint I'd give to this is that I think a lot of these people we see being performative on Twitter and social media are really vocal minorities. It's easy to sort of fall for the selection bias and generalize that, oh, this is what the young generation is like. But I think that there's a silent majority out there. I think most young people perhaps aren't necessarily like this. But what worries me about this and about wokeness in particular, if I am to elaborate, is that with both extreme ideologies on all sides of the spectrum. The problem I have is when you sort of reduce a person to their identity of birth, which they had nothing to do with. So, on the right side, it could be that you are hated just because you're a Muslim, and that's it. That's enough. And you can't love who you want. And on the left, it's again, you're either an oppressor or you're a victim. And once you are reduced to a particular thing like cishet Savarna, once you're reduced to that, one, it shuts down conversation completely, because the implicit message is that the content of the argument doesn't matter. You're an oppressor making it, and you're responsible for all oppression. But the other aspect of it, like forget who might be at the receiving end of that. The other aspect of it is that once you start thinking in those categories, and I would imagine that once you take those positions, you start thinking in those categories, you become the person you pretend to be, you become your persona in a sense, then it's very sad, because then you're thinking in a very limited way about people. People are rich, people are deep, people are complex, and you reduce them to something and you think about them like that. And maybe you think about yourself, if you think about yourself in some terms of victimhood, that kind of prevents you. Like one of the things I've discussed in previous episodes is how, there is so much talk, for example, about how the current dispensation is casteist. Now, the thing is that more Dalits voted for Modi in both 2014 and 2019 than for any other party. A fact that, Mewani lamented in the context of Gujarat. And I think what's happening there is that upper class elite Savarna activists on Twitter will always be about, Dalits are victims. But Dalits across the country are implicitly saying with their actions that, hey, we are not only Dalits, we're a lot more than that. And there might be a problem with the identity they are asserting in its place, which is a whole Hindu identity and all that. There's also a problem with that, but it's dangerous to think in terms of people as categories. And that's as much a criticism about a particular ideology as a lament for the young people who fall into those modes of thinking. And you work with a lot of young people, which I don't on an active daily basis. What do you see around you? Like when I say that these are only vocal minorities, or what's your sense?
In fact, I was about to come to that. I think you're right statistically, but because we live in little bubbles in India, like statistically, like I said, while growing up, you and I were not necessarily middle class. If you take
exactly
the statistical Indian population was 60 crore in 1983-84 when because I remember that number from our book, 60 crore, ki abadi wala desh, Bhartiya. So we were probably in the top 5 or 10 crores. So we were definitely not middle class.
I'd say we were the top 1% even then if we could read books.
Yeah. Financially, as far as bank accounts are concerned, or 4Gs, but yeah. As far as when it comes, which is what privilege is all about, confidence of knowing you can do it.
Yeah.
Because knowing who you know kind of thing it makes a difference. But so statistically, you may be right, but the world we inhabit, I'd say you are not, because the world that I inhabit, which is the news world, the media space, it is not a minority. It is the majority. Now maybe that's because media is all about media, and social media is, if you're in media, you're in all likelihood on Twitter and stuff, you're definitely on one of the, like, I don't know many reporters or people who are trained to be reporters who are not on Twitter. So now maybe people, artists aren't, maybe they're on Insta, which is also social media. Maybe there are many people who aren't. And even if they aren't taking such positions. People in the media space definitely are. They're taking very committed, hard positions based on a tweet. And that is a problem. And I think that's a problem for them because they damage themselves a lot more than who they, lash out to or troll. I think young people underestimate, and I didn't. And I'm not saying our generation did everything great. I think we fucked up a lot. And some of the office spaces that we worked in were deeply problematic. I mean, on gender, on the language that was used, on what was okay to say, what was okay to get away with.
Still are, from what I hear about the corporate world and the advertising industry and all that.
Yeah, but in news, it's like moved, it's moved very significantly. But on certain other things, maybe the downside of not, questioning or pushing back at authority because you were asked to do something, you did it, is because that's what we were taught right from school. If your teacher slapped you, he slapped you. Today, if a teacher slaps your child, there's going to be very shindy at home, When we were in school, I remember ribs broken, because of a beating. You just didn't complain. I'm not saying it's a good thing. But the good thing that emerged from that is that we learnt when I joined News Track and Madhu told me to do something, I didn't say, Madhu, let me tell you how to do it. Fuck, dude, like, I can't even think of doing that. I have kids who are telling me how to run my business, man. They come for an interview, for a job, and halfway in, they are telling me how to run News Laundry.
Which is great in a sense.
I don't think so. I think it's stupid because you haven't lived long enough to know shit. You may have read a lot. You just don't know. And not everyone's going to be patient to indulge. Your parents may be patient to indulge you. I'm not. I'm not your uncle or dad or mom. I want to see what you can do.
Yeah.
And you cannot run a business. You're 20, you're 21, you're 22. If you can, then go run it. Don't tell me how to run it. You don't come for a job and tell the guy how to do his. Especially when they've spoken well, you've heard them out. I mean, they don't know shit.
Yeah.
That attitude, that sense of confidence that social media gives you, that leveler, I think keeps them from learning. I think their learning curve on basic dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, is going to be a lot longer. Their awareness is a lot more than ours, way more. They will know how many states there are. They will know who the chief minister of every state is. They may know, what is the latest bill to be tabled. They would know, what happened at the climate conference. But their understanding of how the world operates, being able to identify one car from the other is one thing. Being able to identify how that engine works takes time. So their first level awareness, I think, is way more than ours. But the second level understanding is deeply compromised because of that cocksure attitude that I know everything because it's a theorem. It's not a theorem. Only a theorem is a theorem. Everything else is evolving. I'll give you an example. On this whole Dave Chappelle thing, my views, many youngsters tell me, I didn't think there was anything wrong with Dave Chappelle's. I just saw the closer, the last one. I haven't seen much of his earlier work, I must admit. But what I have seen of his, which is a little bit, I don't see him as homophobic or transphobic. Now, I may be wrong, but I was talking to someone, say, how can you say that? Oh my God, everything's oh my God.
Yeah.
I said, okay, let's reason this. Let's start off from, my starting point is, I understand homophobia is a thing because I know, I went to an all-boys school. I know how horrible it was for many guys who couldn't come out. And there was no question of coming out, man.
Yeah.
I mean, many of them, it's taken them in their 40s to come out, because the trauma of childhood doesn't go, with bloody dormitory full of, prison rules kind of situation. I understand there's something called homophobia and transphobia. I understand a significant amount of people, if not majority, have that. I'm aware of that and I acknowledge that. Now, let's come to, is Dave Chappelle that? Are you willing to start your point of view from the fact that there is something called over-wokeness or, this over-political correctness? And then, is it possible that is what is leading to... And then come... The dude would refuse to acknowledge that there is such a thing. Which is why there is no conversation. If you cannot even acknowledge that there is such a thing as an over-wokeness, that everything is this performative political correctness, then dude, you have decided this is a mathematical theorem and you're fucked. It's not my loss. Because I will learn, because I understand these are fluid things. If things that are complex, socio-political, sociological, gender, contextual to the society you're in, not everybody who lived in the 1800s was evil. There were good people then, as many as now. There were stupid people as many as now. But slavery was a thing which was normal. Casteism was a thing. Like Mangal Pandey. In that film, when Mangal Pandey is going in the morning, he's the hero. Amir Khan as Mangal Pandey is the hero of the film. I don't know whether you remember this. Now, the guy who's sweeping the ghat where he's taking a dip because Pandey ji is Janayu Dhari. And it was a comedy sequence. Now, I think it was a problematic thing to have that as a comedy sequence in Mangal Pandey in the 2000s, whenever it was made. Because it's not cute that your hero doesn't want this, Dalit guy's shadow to fall on him. And he is the hero. You could have made that comment in a way that was sympathetic to Mangal Pandey. That dude, he was a product of the 1800s. But it's not funny. It's not okay. So, not everybody who lives them is evil. They were a product, just like you and I, a product of our times. We grew up in a generation where calling someone a fag was affectionate. Hey, fag, what are you doing this evening? Yeah, let's go get a drink. Like, you can't do that today. So, we are now, this generation thinks that they've got 2 plus 2 is 4 and it will be 4 forever. Life is not math. And I think because of social media, because it is set there in stone, it is math. I remember the first so-called, back then it was a scandal, the whole, gay scandal that came out in school was with much, this thing you're telling my sister, of course, one couldn't tell parents because my parents would flip out and, they'd probably say, Beta, you are so tiny, no one has tried anything on you, whatever. They'd flip out. But my sister, I remember telling me that, so what's the problem? I said, what do you mean, what's the problem, dude? He's a homo. And she's like, so? I was 15 or 16 and she was, I think, in college by then. She was finished college, 6 years older. So yeah, she must have been third year. So, and then she sat me down. She says, what makes you think that there's something wrong with that? I couldn't answer the question. I said, because it's natural. She says, what's natural? She says, are you natural? You're so much tinier than everybody else. Are you a freak? Then, so she sat me down. She explained to me. She asked me questions I didn't have answers to. Why is it not normal? I was like, hey? Okay. She says, who says that this is how it should be? Are you following some, Veda or some part, Ramayana, Mahabharata likha hai? So then you kind of said, yeah, what the fuck, man? So by the time I was in class 12, I was one of the most progressive kids in my class because at that time, majority of the boys were still, dude, don't. Hey, dude, you can't be a fag kind of shit. And I was like, dude, shut the fuck up, yeah. Just leave these guys alone. And I remember, certain guys being bullied and I was like, fuck, dude, back off. And because I had friends who were,
big,
people would listen to me. But it took a while to evolve. And even for 1991, I was more progressive than 90% of my batch. And I'm still evolving, I'm still learning. But I'm not wrong on everything, dude. I may be wrong on some. And this is a sense of self-doubt that the overwoke Gen Z doesn't have. They know today how it is forever. And oh boy, are they fucking in for a surprise when they... Yeah. And sorry, just one thing. I read this one fantastic book review that he was my flatmate for a while when I was in college because, we couldn't afford for me to live by myself. So I had, because my dad is Fauji quota, he had got, the retired of Faujis would get Noida, there was one colony. In South Delhi, there was one colony. In East Delhi, there was one colony where all the retired Fauji colonies that had come up. So he got a flat there. So I was sharing it. His name was Sunil Mehra. In fact, he was a writer for India Today and Outlook. And one of the most gifted writers. Now he does this Dastan Goi. And he was one of the petitioners for that 66A. 66A bol raha hu, shit. Everything of mine is 66A. The decriminalizing homosexuality, which was not 66A, which was...
377.
66A was that...
Information.
Yeah. So, and I remember Tara Deshpande had come in a film called Is Raat Ki Subah Nahi.
Yeah.
And, she was like rave reviews and she's the, new Smita Patil, the thinking man, sex bomb and ye wo toota. And she was 24 and she wrote a book. So, an autobiography. And I remember he reviewed it and it was patronizing and a little nasty, but it was really funny. And I was not yet 24. And I must have been 20, 21 at the time when I read it. He said, you're really smart, you're really bright, you're really talented, but you haven't lived long enough yet to write an autobiography. Because you got nothing to tell me. I mean, either you're Ronaldo who grew up in poverty and bloody became Ronaldo. Then in 24, you have a story. But if you're a middle class kid like you and me, what are you going to write at 24? That I'd done a film. And that is something that I think a lot of kids need to do. You just haven't lived long enough yet. And there is no substitute to experience. And that is something that I am more and more convinced as I get older.
Yeah, we're going to be called uncles for saying this. First of all, credit to your sister for sitting down and having that conversation with you back in that day, which is pretty impressive. And also good that you listened, because in this age of social media, if you had already taken stances everywhere, then who knows? But like one way to figure out...
I should have beaten me up, so...
Yeah. One way to figure out how sort of open people are, I think, is just to ask them that what facts would convince you are wrong. And if there's absolutely nothing, then obviously it's dogmatic. Like, I've gotten into scraps because, when Chimamanda Adichie wrote an excellent piece on social media a while back, I linked it and people were like, hey, but she's transphobic and all that. And I was like, why is she transphobic? And I didn't find any of that convincing. And one of the reasons was, hey, but because she defended J.K. Rowling. And I was like, okay, so why is Rowling transphobic? Because I really don't think she is. From everything that I have read, I think those are over interpretations. And what I've realized is that when these so-called facts, Rowling is transphobic, when it almost becomes a dogmatic matter, and it reminds me in some ways of the blasphemy law in Pakistan. Like in Pakistan, if someone is charged with blasphemy, you can't even say they may not have committed blasphemy, because if they say that, you will be a blasphemer yourself. So it's not like you're defending blasphemy. All you're saying is that she hasn't committed blasphemy. But just by saying that she may not have committed it, you're a blasphemer yourself.
correct.
So of course I got called a transphobe myself,
Right.
which is as far from the truth as it can be. So let's kind of get back to the trajectory of your career we left off in DU, which the environment sounds like a lot of these young people should actually perhaps go there and get some experience.
Really, they should. I mean, I tell them. By the way, something that I regret often is like when I flip out, when I get angry, which I don't get so often. I used to get really angry very often. Like I was on a hair trigger all the time. There was stress. I was doing a lot of things. I was shooting heavy on my plate. I was like, my day was packed, man. And at that time, just because you're always on edge, you flip out. I don't do that so much, but sometimes when I do, I really regret it later at night. Like, which is why I don't carry grudges, because if I carry grudges and the same, standard is applied to me, a lot of people won't talk to me ever, because when I lose it, I can say really nasty things. But, this I have said often enough, that you should have been in DU in the 90s and you would not be so, oh, ye ho gaya, oh, this was, too much, oh, I can't deal with this, oh, this gives me anxiety. Dude, there, till you were back home, you'd always be dealing with anxiety. That was just the environment it was. So, yeah, I think there is something to say about tough love, yeah. You can't go through life not expecting to have doubt or be anxious. It's not a condition, it's life. And that's not to say I'm not denying that there is something called anxiety, but I just think that unless there is something deeply wrong with this generation, the data of people who I know who have anxiety is way more than I think would be considered an acceptable level for a society to be largely healthy. Then our society is finished.
Jonathan Haidt had made this great observation in the context of teenage girls committing suicide more and more in the US and suffering from depression. And there was a Facebook study which actually validated this, which Facebook suppressed many years ago. And the thesis was this, that when the internet really started exploding, people worried about teenage boys, young boys. They said that they'll play video games all the time and they'll be violent and all that. Now it turns out that was just fine. The boys played video games and learned problem solving. It wasn't a big deal. They developed fine. The problem happened with the girls, because how girls would typically socialize when they're adolescent or pre-adolescent or whatever, not my words, I'm kind of paraphrasing what others have said and experts have said, is that they're kind of hanging out together in school and that's how they're being social and, all of that. But what social media did was it pushed them into a performative space like Instagram, where everybody's looking their best and all of that. And the anxieties of having to be performative, having to compete all the time. Like I think you and I had the luxury of being able to fall into our skins and discover a self without needing to construct it for ourselves to compete with everybody else's constructed selves. And it's something I feel really bad for all these people. But I hope that it's kind of a small minority, and if you see more of them, perhaps it's the self-selection of the media profession itself which might attract those people. That's my hope. I don't know. But to get back to the narrative of your life, so you've done your economics at Hansraj College and all that. What are you looking at doing, and how do you then end up at Newstrack?
Looking at just surviving. I mean, there's certain bits that I won't go into because I'm a very private person, but a variety of things by 95 was, it just threw my life into a spin where I was kind of adrift. And I would have to watch out for myself, or my sisters would have to watch out to what I did. There was nobody else really looking over what I was up to. So my sister had a very close friend, Sabrina Dhawan, who's now a professor at NYU. She also wrote Monsoon Wedding. and Kamine, and I think Ishkiya. She's done a whole bunch of films with Vishal. She was a reporter with News Track, which was a news magazine, and she had known me since I was 12. And just so you know that my sister went to school, they had a group, Srinivas and Jain of NDTV, Vasu, Sabrina, my sister, and there were 2 or 3 more others. They were, at Hindu College English Honours gang. And I was in school, I was in class 6 or 7. So when I used to come to Delhi, that was my first exposure to DU. I mean, they were the nerds of, so it had the arty bunch, it had the goons, it had the rich kids kind of thing. So they were the nerds. So Sabrina said, what are you doing in third year college? And my sister said, he hardly ever goes to college. I know he's hanging out here, there with all sorts of... And I had to start making a living. It wasn't, I mean, I had to start making money. I had to start fending for myself. So she said, why don't you come and work at News Track? She says, you write well. You've already written a few book reviews for this magazine while you're here. Come and meet my boss, Madhu. So I said, ठीक है, मतलब और तो कुछ कोई तीर मार नहीं रहा था. I was, cable TV had come in, so you would either watch, Bold and Beautiful, all those shit shows that came, or watch MTV, Banjo Macho. You remember those? Channel V.
I worked in Channel V and MTV for 5 years.
Oh, you did? Wow.
94 to 99.
Dude, I look at that. Do you remember that Banjo Macho, the characters were going through
very vaguely.
That would not make it on air today.
Yeah, none of that would make it on air.
Dude, it was so funny and it was hysterical.
Yeah.
And I remember the spoof of this. They had this clay motion Salman Khan character and that oh Jane Jana, dude, that song, and it was like really potty humor. So the Salman Khan guy laughing and says, oh Jane, ye hai kal ka khana, and he really like farts at the audience. It was so stupid, but it was so funny. It would never. But anyway, so I went and met Madhu, and Madhu was like very busy. Like she, even now, I mean now she's I think 74. That time I'm talking about 95, so it's how many years ago?
So she'd be 50 perhaps?
Yeah. So I mean you can imagine if at 74 she walks so fast, like she's bzz, 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 bzz. She says, yeah, what's your name? Abhinandan. Okay, fine, come from tomorrow, we'll see, news researcher. So it was like a 5-minute interview. Now this is what I mean by privilege. I got a foot into News Track, which had probably 30 reporters at the time. I mean, everyone who's heading any news organization in India right now, of consequence, is from News Track. And I got in there just because I knew Sabrina.
Yeah.
So you may not be the son of an industrialist, but you are privileged because you can walk in and get a chance. Now, whether you want to, fuck up that chance or not is up to you. But dude, 99.99% will not even get that chance.
They won't even know that chance.
Yeah, exactly. So I went and one thing was that, and this is what I even tell people, I may have been rebellious and often not, I had a lot of problems. I wasn't so great. But I was very hardworking, which is why till today laziness makes me more angry than anything else. When I see a young person who's working and is lazy, oh man, I just flip out. I'm like, if you fucking can't work at this age, when you're fucking 47, you'll be doing jack shit. You're at your prime. I could get by 3 to 4 days without sleeping more than 3 hours a day. Yeah. Today, of course, I've got diabetes and I'm sure that's one of the reasons. But I can't do that. Today, if I go without 8 hours of sleep for my second day, I'll get a cough, cold, I'd be zombieing.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
But when you're young, you can do that. You can, get smashed. You can wake up in the morning 6, head to office. And we're talking about pre-internet, pre-EVMs. So I started working as a researcher. There was such a thing as a researcher. And later in news, there were no such things as researchers. News Laundry still has people as researchers. I must add. I've restarted that, what I learned from Madhu. And researcher meant that you didn't have the internet. So let's say, I remember the first story I was working on was on Altaf Hussain of the MQM, the Muttuhadi Qawmi movement of Pakistan. So of course, I don't know who the fuck Altaf Hussain was. So say go to the Indian Library and get me research on Altaf Hussain, which research on Altaf Hussain meant you took a file, you wrote on that Altaf Hussain for Alpana Kishore, who was my immediate boss at the time. And then Madhu was her boss. And you go to, so Competent House, which is Connaught Place, Middle Circle, was a News Track office. Indian office was A block, the corner office. And Indian Library was in this N block only on the inner circle. So you went in there and you had, with those wheels, you pull those things and those columns move.
Yeah.
I don't know what you call those, but they're on these tracks. So these huge from the ground to the ceiling. They're these cabinets, and you with a wheel you can move them. They're like 10 of them stacked up. So all the Time magazines, all the India Today magazines, all the Times of India newspapers, they're all in these big files, like with the date, right, from like 1980 to 82, 82 to 83, 83. And you just start taking them out at random.
And looking for it.
And looking for anything to do with Altaf Hussain. What you do with a search of Altaf Hussain today. And then so you read like one paragraph of the below of everything. And then you say, okay, Altaf Hussain, photocopy. So over like 4-5 days, you have a file that is fairly thick of Altaf Hussain related articles. And then you take it to the reporter. He or she will read that. Then they will determine the story on Altaf Hussain. And that story will be scripted. There'll be shoots happening over 2, 3, 4 days. Then edits happening over 2, 3 days. And then a story will come out which will be anything from 5 to 25 minutes. That's how news was.
I'm so glad you sketched it out in detail like that, because people today, including me often, just take the internet for granted. That research hai to search karo, and it's like physically going there, moving wheels, columns moving, taking out shit at random. There's no search. You got everything.
Yeah, you got it. So you just take one file after the other. So you got chuck. Like the moment you see Pooja Bedi photo, you know it's not Altaf Hussain.
Yeah.
So it's the people may be thinking, so that means you read every magazine. No, you're smart. You open it, if there's a cover story in Pakistan, you know there'll be a mention of Altaf Hussain. So then you find good. If the cover story is on Rajiv Gandhi's assassination, for example, then you know that these pages you don't even go. You see, okay, this story is from page 29 to page 38 as Rajiv Gandhi, nothing on that. Page that says Pooja Bedi's photo, this is not Altaf Hussain, tuck. So that's how you go through it. So sometimes you can go through like 20 magazines in like 40 minutes and you're fairly accurate. So yeah, that was how we did research. And then, within 3 months, I was, elevated to a reporter. Then you started doing your own stories. Meanwhile, News Track kind of died. I mean, it became a weekly show. The cassettes were phased out. In fact, the cassettes were phased out the month I joined. I think a month before that. We were just doing the last.
Do those archives exist anywhere?
Well, I have the VHS tapes in my office.
So I want to ask you about one particular, sorry for the digression, but one particular story that imprinted itself on me just because it was so hilarious and so truthful, which I still remember, which would have been before your time, but you might have seen it. And it was this interview of Devi Lal, where he was being asked that, why he made Om Prakash Chautala the chief minister of Haryana at the time. And I remember the angle was like he was sort of in a banyan and dhoti, and his feet were up on this thing in the garden, and the angle was from below the shoe. So you had giant kids and Devi Lal in the background.
Right, I remember the shot.
And the question was कि आपने अपने बेटे को चीफ मिनिस्टर क्यों बनाया? And Devi Lal said, तो क्या भजन लाल के छोड़े को बनाओ? Which I thought was a remarkable answer, right? It's you got, and I haven't obviously found it anywhere on YouTube, but if you have the tapes,
I have all the archives. So of course, then Aaj Tak started as a bulletin, and I remember when Aaj Tak started, and here's again where I was wrong, and so wrong. When Aaj Tak started, people may take Hindi news as a viewership thing for granted, but I mean, back then I think Ajit was a Punjabi paper that had a huge circulation. Otherwise, news was an English thing on television. There was a Hindi, but News Track, the Hindi News Track was a later thing. India Today was a Hindi magazine. There was Dharamyug and Saptahik Hindustan, but they didn't have, the kind of sway. I don't know about the numbers, but I'm guessing, considering they didn't really rock the world and they folded up soon. India Today, English magazine, there was an India Today Hindi, which was like an afterthought, but news was English. News Track. Then, after News Track's spectacular success, Eyewitness had started. Karan Thapar started some cassettes. Then there was People Plus. There was a whole bunch of them came. So when Aaj Tak started, most people, and you just, observe and say, हाँ, ठीक ही बोलते हैं. Many people were of the view, यार, चलेगा कहाँ है? Hindi people don't want news. They want Govinda. They want cinema. So for English speaking, there's news. For Hindi speaking, there's cinema. That was the thinking. And fuck how wrong everybody was.
And how fucking patronizing that was.
I know.
Wow.
And how Aaj Tak exploded and News Track folded up. And Aaj Tak became the thing.
Yeah.
So then I reported for Aaj Tak. And that was a huge kind of shock. Because from stories being between 5 to 15 minutes, the first phase when it was Aaj Tak as a bulletin was 24 minutes. because there was 6 minutes FCT, which is called free commercial time. 3 minutes belong to the government, 3 minutes belong to the person. And we had to finish stories in 90 seconds. I was like, what the fuck? 90 seconds is just मैं समय बांध रहा हूँ तब तक तो.
Yeah.
So that is what Arun Shourie referred to soundbite journalism. So that we had formula: opening voiceover, which is about half a page, bite; middle voiceover, bite; closing voiceover, piece to camera, done, story over. And that you saw how people like SP Singh, who died way too early, and there was Ajay Dada, who also unfortunately died in a car accident, and Nakvi Dada, they knew how to tell that story quickly, just get to the meat of the story. And of course, there's one of the advantages of working in the 90s was that you got to cover 3 general elections in 5 years. Normally, for people, it took 15 years because, Devilal Bulram, Sitaram Kesari made that government collapse. So there was one. Then there was a hung parliament, Atal Bihari Vajpayee's 13-day government and the 13-month government and another election. So there was, so you got to cover, 2 Lok Sabha elections very close to each other. And there were really funny things because that was the first time there was live happening for private. Otherwise, Doordarshan used to do live. So it was Aapka Faisla, and which was all the reporters and anchors would be India Today's, which was Tavleen, Veer, Madhu, and who was the 4th? Karan Thapar. And all the reporters would be us guys, and the infrastructure and the producers would be Doordarshan's. And I remember there was such a huge difference because in our time, dude, if you didn't get the shit done, your ass would be fucking kicked. And Madhu didn't suffer fools. And we were working with producers. So, there was such a funny story. There's a guy called Jujhar Singh. He now, I think, does a show on News X. He used to do a show. You may have seen him. He used to anchor a bunch of stuff. And badi jaddojahad karke, he got LK Advani. Like, it was a fucking scoop, at night. LK Advani ko le aaya hai. That time, there used to be these big OB vans. Now OB vans are these short truck type things that also aren't used. Now you have a little bit. The OB van was the size of a, bus. Inside, there would be all these monitors. There would be the faders. There would be those big consoles like, this one. And it had this one master switch. Once you switched it off, like the old ACs, you can't switch it on for half an hour. You have to wait half an hour and then switch it on. So it was dinner time, and Doordarshan is Sarkari job. So they said dinner time. So Jhar said, "Bata, I've got LK Advani. Advani ji aa rahe hain. Aa rahe honge." Khadak. He switched it off.
Oh my God.
And Jhar like, I can't get him back. And this guy said, "हम dinner खाने जा रहे हैं. अभी नहीं होगा. उनको dinner के बाद आए." I'm like, fuck. You saw the power of a government job, man. They were answerable to nobody. So, but anyway, I worked really hard. Like, for the time that I was there, I didn't stand out for my intellect or anything. But if anything needed to be done which needed you to stay in office for 3 nights, I wouldn't. Why? No, I wanted to go home. One was for a lot of people, there was genuine this thing, especially back then for girls, that, the parents won't say, you'll go to office on Monday, come back on Thursday. Are you fucking serious? For a lot of guys also, that would be the case. अपने कोई पूछने वाला था नहीं तो भाई चाहे मैं थर्सडे आऊँ कि फ्राइडे आऊँ कि मैं आऊँ ही नहीं, no one gave a fuck. So I worked very hard for those 4 years, from 95 to 99. But when Madhu quit, which was I think 96, 97, I knew that I'm not going to want to work here for very long. Journalism, the way it was being done that time was not for me. And at the back of my head, it was that I had no problem reporting to Madhu, because I was very young, I was just 20. But as I became 22, 23, that thought crystallized. Maybe had Madhu continued to be my boss, I would have happily worked, I don't know. But when there was a change of management, the whole, office changed, everything changed. Then Prashant, who was also with me at News Track, we quit and we started a production house called Small Screen in 99. And then we did a documentary film which won a couple of awards. So we got back then like $3,500 in award money. That kept you going for a month. Then his wife gave us some money to go month on month. My sister would give us something. So there were 2-3 years of struggle where I often wondered, because buffoons who were, I'm not saying I was their boss, but in office they would be nobodies, were suddenly anchoring prime times. That is when the boom happened, the mid 2000. And me and Prashant used to say, "Yaar, humne galti to nahi kar di." we'd be watching TV. Say, ये चूतिया ये anchor कर रहा है क्या? Acha, then I don't want to take names. But then someone, he's become managing editor. I said, are you fucking serious? That duffer doesn't know his ass from his elbow. And then suddenly that time Hyundai accent आई थी. सबकी accent, Hyundai accent खरीदने लग गए थे. I went from earning, I joined at 3,500, then I, moved to 7,000 as soon as I became a reporter. Then I went up to 11,500. When I quit, which was in Bombay, I was posted to Bombay, and Milind Khandekar was my boss at the time. I think now he's heading Aaj Tak, and he was with ABP for a while. At that time, sorry, what was that? Yeah, that, a lot of these people who we had worked with would finance. So from 11,000, 12,000 salaries, at that time, you're talking people were getting 40, 45,000, which is unheard of in our profession. And यहाँ हमारा एक डॉक्यूमेंट्री फिल्म हो गई थी, उसके बाद दूसरा प्रोजेक्ट मिले ना मिले, टुच्ची सी कोई, we'd get a film for some hotel to do a corporate film. It was like, and then, you'd often wonder, dude, have we made the wrong choice? Like, people who are not even half as smart as us, or so we thought, are anchoring primetime shows. They are wearing suits. You and I are still struggling to, buy another pair of shoes. But I'm glad we stuck it out. I'm so glad. Because then when the boom happened, then, we got, one show, we got election shows for some Tamil channel. Because we had a reporter's background. Then we did a couple of travel shows. Then the travel boom started. Then, we did a show called Highway and I Played, became a spectacular success. Then Fox Traveler came. We did Twist of Taste with Vineet Bhatia. So I was so glad we stuck it out, because for the next 7 or 8 years, now startup is a thing. So from just Prashant, me, Pancham and Ramakant, who were our office guys, and Ramakant is still with us at News Laundry. Pancham has retired and gone back to his village in Kumaon. He just retired last year. So the 4 founders of Small Screen were Prashant, Ramakant, Pancham and me. And then without any funding, VC, we grew from 4 people to 54 people. And it was organic growth, no funding. You did a show, you saved some money, you hired another person. You did a show, saved some money, bought an Apple G3. When G3 hota tha. Then you saved some money, bought a G4, hired another editor. And then you grew. And then at one time, there was not a lifestyle channel in India which did not have a travel show that wasn't produced by us. Twist of Taste, What's with Indian Men, What's with Indian Women, Roti Rasta India, Highway on My Plate. I don't even remember the names of, we had a travel show on every channel. And meanwhile, there were other shows we were doing small-time ad films. And meanwhile, I was writing this show called Gustakhi Maaf and the Great Indian Tamasha. Again,
I remember that.
How did I get that? A friend of mine used to work at NTV, Manvi Sinha. She was, at Profit. She was an anchor there. And she was in Vellum Girls. She was a school captain. I was at Doon. And she was my mother's favorite student. And my mother used to keep saying that, you're Titan Nikammai. She's going for debates at the age of 14, 15. You are being sent up to the headmaster for indiscipline. Because I used to get into...
She was Sharma ji ka beta.
She was Sharma ji ka beta. And I was the guy who was always being complained about, that your son, did this. And then he was rude to such and such teacher. And then he was rude to such and such boy. And then he did this and he did that. So Manvi was there and they were looking to start and it was very hush-hush at the time. We can't tell you too much, but it's political and it's funny. Can you do that? I was like, of course I can do that, because my stories would get rejected all the time at Aaj Tak, because I would, try to add some funny element to the stories. And it was, Nakul said, Nikku, ye kya tamashe kar rahe ho? Ye news hai. Ye kaisa voiceover likha? I remember, and I was always asked to do during election time, we do political stories. Otherwise, you'd ask to do stories like, go to Lodi Garden and do a vox pop on what do people feel about Bill Clinton's impeachment. Like, why the fuck does the Lodi Garden walk and give a fuck about Bill Clinton? But, or go to all the netas and ask them what is the New Year resolution. I remember Pranab Mukherjee going to his house, and that guy also had a bungalow opposite Pranab Mukherjee, that, the guy who hurt his leg in a bomb blast. Bitla, that Sikh guy who was...
Yeah. I forget the name, but I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
And Sushma Swaraj, I remember. You could just walk into the house and ask for an interview, yeah. I mean,
and ask them the New Year resolution.
Yeah, dude, and they'd entertain you, because Newstrack was the only game in town. No one would say no to Newstrack camera.
Yeah.
So, when I was 21, 22, I interviewed Sushma Swaraj, I interviewed Pranab Mukherjee, I interviewed that Home Minister would keep changing his outfit, Patil.
Pratibha Patil.
No. The Congress ka yaar, from Maharashtra, the Home Minister who got a lot of flack when the bomb blast happened. Shivraj Patil. Of course, yeah. So, I mean, I've interviewed all these guys because if you were an Aaj Tak on a Newstalk camera, you were the biggest game.
Were there any memorable New Year resolutions?
Dude, everybody want to write a book.
Yeah.
I mean, this year I will write a book. I was like, okay. So there was nothing very creative. I remember. So it was exciting in that sense. And anyway, so then when this happened, Manvi said, she called me and she said, NDTV is looking for a show where they're looking for a funny guy who knows politics. And I thought, you're the guy. So why don't you come and meet the producer and Pranoy? I didn't get Pranoy as a DOSCO. Now, this is what I mean, a privilege.
Yeah.
As soon as you walk in, you say,
Small circles.
Doon, batch of 92. Oh, really? Doon, batch of 66, That immediate, there's a bond there. So they asked me to write 2-3 scripts, which were quite funny. There was so much of material in any case. So then I wrote that show from 2003-2010, which was a daily show. I mean, first it was a weekly and then became a daily show, which was very hard. That taught me discipline, waking up every morning at 6 after having watched 2 or 3 bulletins the night before. Wait for the newspapers to come, see the first bulletin. By 11 o'clock, have 3 scripts ready, 3 gags to send back. But because of this kida of news, by now, news had become, channels had started. They had mushroomed all sorts of Z. Star had started with NDTV in part. Now, it wasn't insane like it is now, but it was still ridiculously shrill. And I remember me and Madhu would often meet in Delhi, because I have a common friend who's a very good friend of hers. So you'd often meet at some wedding or something. Not to say that I move in Madhu's circles, but I have this one friend who is very friendly with Madhu, whose parents are very friendly with Madhu. So, because at that time we were all a marriageable age, there were 3 quick succession marriages. And Madhu was there at the marriage, so was I. And we're like, dude, what the fuck is happening? Because now I have a lot of respect for them. And many of them are friends of mine. But many of them went through a phase where they were so impressed with themselves being on TV that they became like, oh my God, look, here I am. Look, here, there's this happening and I'm here kind of thing. And we had done all that at News Strike, So Madhu said we should do a show that takes apart all this. So we pitched that show. We took it to Rajdeep, who had started CNN IBN. We took it to Pranoy. We took it to this one who at times now he was doing Arnab. It was a great idea because, now people take for granted that everyone takes pot shots at each other. In the mid 2000s to the early 2011, 12s and all, there was this unspoken rule. You will attack everybody, but not fellow media, no matter what you think of them. And I was like, who the fuck made this rule? And this is when things like My Sister's Talk, who made this rule? Very early in life, I was taught that, is it a rule of nature or is it math? If it is neither of these, it can be broken. So I'm like, why the fuck can't you name each other and still be friends? I really like this a lot about Barkha. We have done searing critique of Barkha. I myself have criticized various aspects of hers and I also really admire various aspects of hers. But she can take it in the jaw and move on. She'll say, theek hai, you didn't like that, theek hai. You like this, theek hai, chalo, dosti bani rahe. But she won't sulk. Someone like Sagrika doesn't have that quality. Aapne ek baar burai kar di, katti for life. And most people in the media were like this. So I didn't give a fuck because I have very good friends who are not in the media. So I said, I don't want to be friends with you anyway. Madhu doesn't give a fuck because, dude, I'm your रिश्ते में तो हम तुम्हारे बाप लगते हैं नाम है मदद. So dude, so everyone said lovely idea, but you'll criticize us also. We said, of course you'll criticize you. We can't be on your channel and take pot shots, but you, no. But and many of them said, no, this is not done. We shouldn't comment on media. So Prashant, Madhu, me, Rupak, by that time our friend had also joined Small Screen because he had said he was in a family business. He's a childhood friend of mine. And he said, dude, he's creative bent. He says, I don't want to do that. Let me come on to Small Screen and we'll do something. And it's grown ever since. Now, Small Screen News Laundry are run separately because for propriety reasons, corporate governance, it's conflict of interest. There are hundreds of things happen. So we separated in 2014 and also the investor demands, conditions, precedents. You cannot sit on any other board and all that shit. So you had to separate everything. But so Prashant said, अरे fuck everyone यार, हम इंटरनेट पे चलाएंगे. तो मैंने कहा इंटरनेट सारा देखता कौन है? He says देखते हैं यार, 1% तो देखते हैं. तो by that time I was also, I'm only talking about professional career. Meanwhile, Arvind Kejriwal had also happened in 2002 when I was shooting documentaries and we became very friendly and then we started an NGO together and stuff. Then when this thing happened, I realized the power of the internet. I said, Prashant, you're very smart here. Let's do this on the internet. So then when we said do this on the internet, then from one show, which was Clothesline Madhu's show, it became, Niku, you do a series called I Agree, where you interview. We'll do articles, we'll do cartoons, we'll do comics. And there was not much additional cost because Small Screen had, 50 employees. It had, 12 editing machines. It had 8 directors. It had, so an additional cost, 4-5 people we'd hire and we'd start. It was a passion project. It was कीड़ा था. News का कीड़ा प्रशांत को था, मधु को था, मुझे था. That was the only reason News Laundry started. And in 2-3 years, it became a thing. And one thing from the beginning, we were clear that it is subscribers only. I had, at that time, and I remember discussing this with Madhu, figured that ads will kill news. And if you see in 2012, our mission statement says this. I said, news cannot survive on ads. Because even though the insanity of Arnav had not happened yet, the whole thing of Bunty and Bubbly anchoring a show, this was, I think, in 2004-05, when Rani Mukherjee, I was watching news, I was like, what the fuck? How can your prime time is sacred. You cannot turn this into a gimmick to do Bunty. And this is NDTV, dude. It's not like Times Now. Every channel was doing, Sohail Seth was a fucking toast of every show, fucking talking crap. Like, I was like, what the fuck? How is this news? And it was just stupid. It wasn't Arnab insanity, let me repeat. But the reasons for it being ridiculous were different. But I was like, because ads. Because this dude will get you ads, that dude will get you ads. No one is going to say anything about cricket because cricket will get you ads. So we had the luxury of not having to make a living because Small Screen was doing amazing work. So we could take that, just you could afford to be virtuous. हम तो ads लेंगे ही नहीं शुरू से. So that was our mission statement. News ads से नहीं चल सकती boss. या तो फिर तुम TRP करोगे या फिर news करोगे. Because that's the nature of the beast. So then of course once it started, and again, but I will say that boss Madhu is, you have to know her to understand what an amazing person she is. She is the kind who would not even ask for a Padma Shri. And Padma Shri givers would know better than to offer it to her. Because she'll say, मैं Padma Shri लेने नहीं आई हूँ यहाँ. Other journalists have no problem in taking Padma Shris. She would not even look at it, so they know better than to give it to her. She was the kind of person who, when we would be, and I will not take names here, at night there was a big thing that happened in Delhi with a very big name, and we all knew that person is friends with. So we were like, dude, and Madhu was in office at night. Madhu, we're going to do this story, this. She said, why are you telling me? Go do it. But, he's friends with, who, your brother, your family, or whatever. You're a reporter, you do the story, I'll handle the rest. Who the fuck has the balls to say that today, tell me? And the only reason Madhu is not considered one of the big, Verghese and Sampar Kitabe likhe is because she's a woman. Madhu was a boss who you could learn so much from. And because she came from such privilege, she didn't give a shit about consequences. She said, you do your job, I will handle the rest. From VP Singh bloody threatening us, to bloody banning our tape, to all sorts of shit happening. That's not your job. You report. She was, the way the newsroom changed when she quit was, someday I'll maybe write a book. It's dramatic. How India Today pre-Madhu and India Today post-Madhu.
One of the things I've been doing in the last couple of years is looking at people's interviewing styles a lot. Part of this is kind of deliberate, just to look at matters of the craft and how people do what they do. And part of it is whenever I have a guest on my show, I'll always watch every other interview of theirs that I can find just to look for material. And one of the things I noticed was, and normally with Indian interviews, I'm incredibly dismayed because people are interrupting all the time, looking for gotcha moments, staying at a very shallow level. And you mentioned Madhu, and I remember her interviews are always so immaculate. In particular, Dinesh Thakur was on my show recently. So while researching for him, I watched Madhu's interview with Dinesh Thakur. And that was the first one where I could just see that, I take tons of notes for my episodes from the books, which I had already done by the time I watched that video. And she used so many of the same quotes that I was planning to ask him about, and so much of that, so meticulous and well organized. So it strikes me. And I want to use that to double click on something that you said earlier, where perhaps being a bit modest, you said in the 90s that you weren't particularly smart or whatever, but you were a hard worker. And that reminds me of something I read in an interview some 20 years ago. And I mentioned this on my show, but I can't figure out whose interview it is. It's a sports person, and it's not Dravid, though it sounds like he would have said it, where the person was asked about talent. And he said, you know what talent is? Talent is not fast twitch muscles or hand eye coordination or any of those things. Talent is when you've been getting up every day in the morning to run. And one day it's a Sunday and it's a holiday and you get up at 6 a.m. and there's a thunderstorm outside and your body is aching and you just want to stay in bed and you still go out and run in the rain. That's talent, right? And one of the lessons that I have learned in my life is that hard work is everything. Everything. I won't put a nuance to that. Hard work is the whole game. Like, I remember I used to think in my 20s that, oh, I am so talented. I am meant for big things. And, oh, this guy knows nothing or whatever, in my arrogant way. And of course, I wasn't as talented as I thought I was then, but self-delusion kind of helps you stick with the game and fake it till you make it. And through life, I've realized many of the people who had that natural flair for things, for doing things, didn't really get very far. And the guys who got far were the guys who worked hard, regardless of how much natural flair they must have. Like in a cricketing context, I see this with someone like Virat Kohli, where in the under 19 years, if you look at him, the first time he played the IPL, it was like such a limited player. He can square of the wicket khel leta hai, uske areas hai, but so limited. And then I think he went on to become our finest batsman, right? Even if he's better in some formats than others. And it's hard work, it's work ethic, it's purely that. And you've earlier mentioned about, you've described your own work ethic, and at the same time you've spoken about how young people today feel so entitled that they're not putting in that work, they're not putting in that hours, and that process is so important. Equally, another thing that I kind of talk to my writing students about and try to kind of drive home is that getting it done is more important than getting it right. There's always a trade-off between these.
Right.
But the only way
Very
to get
true.
it right is to get it done again and again and again and again. And iteration leads to excellence. Like you've spoken about how you wrote Gussa Ki Maaf for what, those 7-8 years. And that iteration.
Every fucking day waking up in the morning and
Every
writing.
fucking day. Yeah. And
has to be funny. And I know 50% of them weren't funny at all.
yeah.
30 were moderately funny, 20 were really funny. I know that. But you had to get it done.
You have to get it done. And chances are that just getting it done meant your funniest ones were way funnier than someone who, just spent 4 years writing one thing. Because that iteration is what makes it good, which makes a lot of good habits reflexive, which eventually over time makes it easy. Tell me a little bit about work ethic, and what you said about Madhu reminded me of that, because what I remember from her interview of Dinesh Thakur is that this is so bloody good. You look at all these other jokers and she's put in the work at her age.
And Madhu, this is and something I used to get really frustrated that this person is ready for an interview. She says, get me his book. I need to read the book. I said, we don't have time to read the book. She said, I'm not going to do the interview. He said, he's giving it tomorrow morning. Okay, I'll read the book through the night. She will not do an interview unless she's read the book. I'm like, dude, just no. She'll stay up all night. She'll read the book. About the work ethic, one thing I will agree with you that it is hard work, but unless it's something like cricket, I can't, overstate or understate. Access is so important.
Of course, I mean, the luck is a big part of the game. But once you get lucky,
Yeah, once you get lucky, it's getting a foot in. Even if you are not wealthy yourself, being in a circle where you can get access to an office where you have a chance to prove yourself is extremely important. I'm sure there are thousands out there who are smarter than me, more hardworking than me. They just haven't had the chance. They don't know Madhu. They didn't know Sabrina, who took them into Madhu's office. Like, I got to work on Monsoon Wedding as a camera assistant. I was wrangling cable, but I knew, dude, and that was hard work, dude. Like, I remember the first day of the set, the first scene we were shooting was Nasir at the golf course asking the other guy for money. I don't know whether you've seen Monsoon Wedding. There's that
it's
one
a
scene.
lovely film, one of my favorite.
And that last scene of that day was PK Dubey in Chandni Chowk Jama Masjid with his mother. And in the middle, we had one scene at Habitat. And we were shooting fucking 2-3 scenes a day. And back in the this was 99, 2000, 2000. It was not, Sanjay Leela and Bhansali would shoot one scene in 3-4 days. We were shooting 3-4 scenes in a day. So it was really hard work. But I got that chance because Sabrina was writing the film. She says, I'm coming to Delhi. She had just finished her course in Colombia. Meera is making a film. It's a small film. We don't know if it'll get to anything. When do you come? You'll get to learn something. I got a chance to work with Meera Nair on Monsoon Wedding. I fucking went, to win the Golden Lion at Venice. Venice, correct. Now, when it comes to the work ethic, let me tell you, I will say I've been very lucky in life. I have been extremely lucky and extremely fortunate, which is why my default setting is to like people and not dislike them. Because in all my life, people have been good to me for no reason. They had no reason. They had nothing to gain from me. But they've been very good to me. Now, when I was planning to quit Aaj Tak because I was like, dude, I can't. So, Naki Dada called me. He says, Nikku, तुम्हें बॉम्बे जाना होगा. तुम सिनेमा करो, तुम कुछ क्रिएटिव करो, ये करो. तो मैंने ठीक है, फ्री की टिकट मिल रही है बॉम्बे. My friend Govind was engaged to Meghna Gulzar, which is Gulzar Saab's daughter. मैंने कहा ठीक है, we'll hang out with him for a while. So I went, I said, Govind, I'm coming there. My salary was 12,000 rupees. I'll need to get a PG, but for a few days, can I come and stay with Babuji? It's called Gulzar Saab. He said, yeah, come. So Babuji is a very large-hearted man. So imagine struggling, staying at Gulzar Saab's bungalow on Pali Hill. Of course, when I was outside the bungalow, I was in armpits in the church gate and then ready going to Dadar for a story, coming back. But once I was in Pali Hill, then that is a privilege that how many people have. So I could be in Bombay for whatever, 2 months or whatever and then when I got there, gave my resignation 3-4 days. I remember poor Milan said, Nikku, tumne yahan aake kya ho gaya? मैंने कहा, Milan, nothing to do with you. I was planning to resign, but I thought, chalo, let's go to Bombay and work there for a month or two, then resign. When I was there, and oh, by the way, so I've told the story when Babuji had come for Media Rumble. So on my 6th day, I had seen a PG in Andheri, or it was even further than Andheri, I think, maybe a little between Andheri and Jogeshwari, maybe. And back then, the Churchgate film, the thing used to end at Malad or something. And now I went to Bombay. Of course, you don't travel in trains, but just for old time's sake, I said, I used to fucking do this every day. And and for a Delhi kid, because here, dude, it was still not as bad. Bombay, the struggle of, you don't have to ride metros, the train. And then you get out and you stand in line for an auto at bloody Andheri, you stand in line, 5 rupees sharing, Nariman Point mein hota tha, in office. So Bombay was very hard. And I've played sport, throughout my life. So in Delhi, I used to play at Siri Fort. Bombay, bloody, either you are working or there's no sport. So I was very unhappy in Bombay. And then I went and worked with Meghna on a film Filhal. So I was there for a year, which I couldn't hack Bombay. But on the 6th day, I said, Babuji, ek jagah mil gayi hai. Thank you so much for your hospitality. He was like, Nikus, he has a deep voice. आप अगर इस घर से अपने लगेज के साथ बाहर निकले, मैं आपकी टांगे तोड़ दूंगा. As long as you're in Bombay, this is your home. I was like, fuck, man. Like, who makes that offer? I was like, Babuji, that's very kind of you. Because he lives alone. Because, Rakhi lives in, that time she used to live in Khar. And Meghna lived with Rakhi. So he had a bungalow on Pali Hill and Boski's room, which was the room he gave me. I was like, dude, that's very kind of you. But seriously, yeah. He says, 2 months, 6 months, year, you want to stay? You are not leaving. And so when I was in Bombay, which was, first stint with Aaj Tak, second stint with Meghna. So in the evening, Tabu's coming for dinner. That time, this guy was making that Mehboob Mere Mehboob. What was that? Filmfare ka jo editor tha, Khalid. Fiza he was making. He would come because Babuji was writing the lyrics to that. So you get to just sit and observe, man, that this is how the best work. And he told me one day, I was like, Babuji, aap roz back. And he writes in Urdu with a book. And I said, what are you working on? Because Fiza ka lyrics ho gaye, gaane record ho gaye. He said, I'm writing. I said, what? He said, how does it matter what? I'm a writer. So I write for 4 hours a day. I was like, what? He says, anything, but I write. He says, too many people are writers, but they don't write. And I was like, fuck. Even Gulzar just writes, and 80% of what he writes is not going to... He has these books, he just writes and reads and writes and reads and writes. He says, if you're a writer, you sit every morning and just write till lunch. Then after lunch, you read. Then in the evening, write some more. And at night when he's watching, and he has this easy chair and he watches the TV on mute. और ticker पढ़ते रहते हैं. And he's saying, क्या बकवास लगाया, ये क्या news है. And this is before it had gone insane. And then he has a book, he'll pick up something and write. So, I got to learn from him. I got to learn from Meera. I got to learn from Sabrina. I got to learn from Madhu. I got to learn from the fucking best here. So I had to be above average. You see, even if I was a dumb fuck, you just have access to people who are just the best at their game.
And we're all working hard. I mean,
And
that's the common thread.
And that is when I realized so many people I know, they roll these joints. I'm working on a film, I'm a random filmmaker. हम सब साले 50 साल के होने वाले, उनकी फिल्म तो अभी तक बनी नहीं. क्योंकि गुलजार जैसे उन्होंने ये नहीं सीखा, boss, you can't be smoking pot for 6 days and write for 1. You fucking write for all 7 days. Even the best do that. And so, I just got, and then when, you got to learn so much, you saw such ridiculous things. You saw the hollowness of a lot of Bollywood. You saw the shallowness of a lot of Bollywood. But you got to see what made who happy. And you learned. And, I learned from Arvind. In 2002, when we didn't have any work, Prashant and I, we'd make documentary films which we were making no money on. लेकिन वैसे ही अपनी कौन सी दुकान चल रही थी तो कुछ सीख ही लेते हैं. So there is this guy called Rajendra Singh, called the Waterman of India. I don't know if you're familiar with him. Max Award. He has a water conference, or used to, I don't know if he still does, in his village in Rajasthan called Bikampura. So he was setting up something called the Jal Bhagirathi Foundation with Gaj Singh. And if you go to Alwar, he's turned that whole place through water harvesting into like a green belt. Like there's this patch in Rajasthan which is like green. It's not a desert. So he was, back in early 2002 was a big name. We said, okay. And water was of great interest to us because Sheila Dikshit was privatizing the Delhi water supply back then. And I was ideologically opposed to it. So I said, let's go to this conference, let's see. And there I saw Arvind speak. He had just quit his job with IT. And I was very impressed with his speech, with his life story. So we met and we spoke. And he came back to Delhi. I came back to Delhi. And then Prashant met him at another water talk in Habitat. And he got him back to office. Now, Arvind had no, money. Neither did I. He needed films for his RTI work and other, the entire. I had an editing system and skills. He said, I can't pay you. I said, chalo theek hai, kuch seekh hi lenge. There's another thing that I tell people. Not everything need be about money. You will learn something. If you see an opportunity, take it. Walk away if you don't think you're learning anything. But it's not always about the money. So then I started working, and Parivartan was like a 10-man organization, men, man and women. There was, Santosh was there, who unfortunately died before the first election. And then we did a couple of campaigns together, RTI campaigns. And by that time, I had started writing Gustaki Maaf for NDTV. So I had a kind of hold over media. I knew people in the media because many of my former colleagues were at prominent channels in senior places. So we did a campaign on RTI. We partnered with like 53 news organizations across the country, every newspaper. And I remember that time, so many people were so forthcoming. And you could walk into HT. I walked into Veer's office and I was like, will you be part of it? Yeah, we'll be part of it. Enram gave me time. Will you be part of it? Yeah. Pranoy, came on board. Everyone came on board. Yeah, every newspaper came on board. And then he won the Magsaysay in 2004 or 5. And by then, Manishi and I had become good friends. And with that money, he found PCRF, which then, once the RTI amendments, I spent a night in Tughlaq Road police station because we were protesting in 2006 against that file notings and stuff. They will not be there. So that time I learned so much from Aruna Roy, Shekhar Singh, Prashant. I saw how these guys work. Like I had seen Gulzar work. Now Gulzar is not a materialistic man. He's not hungry for fame, but he's famous. He takes for granted. When you go out to a restaurant with him, it comes to a standstill. So I could get that even the humblest of people will write because this is who I am. With, from someone like Madhu, you learn you have more than enough money. You're just, working because it excites you. But there's no real, matlab, kuch killat nahi hai life mein. Then you meet people like Arvind and Aruna who are not exactly well-to-do, but they're working like, where will this lead to? Like, what will happen? Like, how will you, where do you see yourself in 10 years? If you ask them, like, will your children be able to afford a college? Like, what the fuck are you doing? Then you learn something from people like that. So then he set that up with the Magsaysay Award money. Then, of course, the whole RTI movement, like he was like, okay, RTIs are coming out. The whole, that sports events, Kalmadi's event in Delhi, what was it called? The Commonwealth Games. That whole, this is RTI say we've taken out the information that each toilet paper was bought for 180 rupees per roll, which is for like 20 rupees, or, the balloon was bought for 13 crore, which is only going to be used once. And there was a lot of corruption in those. But now what? There's no prosecution happening. So that is when his frustration led him to like, Jan Lokpal has to be there. Like, just getting the information out is not enough. Someone has to use that information to prosecute these guys. And CVC can't do it because CVC will tell, suppose, whatever department you're in. So CVC doesn't do an investigation. It tells you to appoint a person to investigate your own department. So that's why conviction rates of corruption are so low. Yeah. So I learned a lot about the thinking on governance, how he had figured out governance at a level where I hadn't encountered anyone. And I had spoken to a lot of people. Like, in fact, when I was reporting the second election, 99 election, I was in Ahmedabad, and the present commissioner, information commissioner, Uday Mahurkar, he was India Today correspondent. He's now written that book on, I think, Savarkar, and he's one of Modi's.
He'd written a book on Modi also, I think. Am I mistaken? Maybe.
No, he must have, because he... So, in fact, he was the India Today correspondent there, so he had called me over for lunch, and he had told me, he gifted me a book on Savarkar. Back then, he was aghast that I didn't know much about Savarkar. So, what kind of school is doing school if you don't even know anything about Savarkar? But back then, we could still sit, have lunch, disagree. We weren't enemies. Today, I don't think, me and Mr. Mahurkar can sit and have that conversation. But what was I talking about? That, yeah. So I had, the way Arvind had broken down governance was something that I was like, okay, wow. And I really liked him, and I found him very sincere, and I found his choices very hard. And when he had actually said that we will block the RTI amendments, that's when I realized that this guy has skills which basically are audacity. So I still remember we were sitting in Sundar Nagri. That's where the Parivartan office used to be. Sundar Nagri is it's a slum resettlement, and he has one little room there. He used to work in that slum on RTI and stuff. I think it must have been about 2003, 4, it must have been. And this is before he got the Magsaysay Award. And he said, वो आया था अखबार में that Manmohan Singh is, it had to be 2004 passed because Manmohan Singh was PM by now. They're going to be amending the RTI Act. File noting will be taken out, certain punitive thing. He says that's the end of the act. And it's taken us so long. There was a lot of lobbying done by, Aruna and everyone to get it through as a national act. Although it existed in Delhi and Maharashtra and Rajasthan as a national act of parliament. It only came once the UPA came in. And it was like, Manmohan and his bureaucrats want to kill this act. So I said, shit, yeah. So he says, we'll block it. So I was like, sorry? He says, we'll stop the amendments. I said, you and like 8 of us little lallus here, out of whom I'm the only one who's a regular source of income. Even though it's not great. He says, क्यों नहीं कर सकते? Who all do you know? मैंने कहा, I know this one, I know that one. Chalo, let's talk to Aruna ji, let's talk to Prashant, let's do this, Dude, in fucking 2 months, he had blocked the fucking amendments here. And that's when I said, dude, this guy is fucking insane. He will aim for something so big, which seems impossible, but he will work night and day. He'll sleep 2 hours. He won't go back home. He took a little kholi in Sundar Nagri. He used to live in that slum. And I always used to wonder, dude, how does your wife deal with you, yeah? So I saw that, and I remember I had written this in Times of India. They had asked me for a column, as just someone, as a fellow traveler, when he became chief minister for the first time. He asked me once, you want to go for a weekend? You want to come? I'm going to Maharashtra. It's a nice hill station, Mul. I said, okay, chalo, let's see. We bloody got to Mul. He wanted to go there, study. A lady who had in Maharashtra, she was running a trade union, and she had been very effective at getting the tribal lands back from mining that had been given. So she ran that place like fucking dawn. She had, of course, she wasn't doing anything bad, but she had managed to retrieve land that no one in the country had been able to get back from industrialists. So we were bloody, and we got there, we stayed in some guest house where there were rats roaming around me. So once I was there. I was like, dude, seriously, you've got me for this, for theek hai, you learn. Because after that, I never went anywhere with him because it was a nightmare 2 days. Because, okay, I may not be, the Prince of Wales, but that's not my idea of a holiday, dude. I can't deal with that shit. So from him, I learned a different skill, that don't think that is too big a task. Just start doing it. You'll get it. And I remember, and this is something that many people have, I remember I've been on panels back then because I wasn't the face of, PCRF. It had 3 trustees, Arvind, Manish and me. And whenever Anna would say, हम दिल्ली आना चाहते हैं, I'm like, dude, अब कौन खरीदेगा ticket? पैसे तो वैसे ही नहीं है. So half the time getting donations, because Arvind and Manish were busy either at Ramle. So I was signing the checks. I remember someone telling me, this has all been funded by XYZ or so and so. I was like, really? Who told you? They are senior journalists. What we call senior. हमें पता है बेटा, you don't know anything. I was like, I sign the fucking checks. Anything goes. Like, I mean, I can tell you, one lot who gave us a lot of support without them was Sri Ravi Shankar's team. They were resource rich. They had a team who are wonderful people. I really like them personally. I don't agree with a lot of what Sri does, and he's become very different. But all those people were really nice people. I mean, they were really gentle, really sweet. You could say some very horrible, offensive things to them. They'd say, "Nahin, Nikko, we don't agree." But they will not hate you for it. But other than his team, there was, it was not funded by any industrialist or RSS or anything. I remember we used to go around with chadar collecting money. Sala is tambu ka kal anna bolenge, hum Maharashtra jana chahte hain. Sala air ticket to kharidni hogi hame. And throughout he was like, I don't want to. I said, you should contest election, because I remember I've been with him in Digvijay Singh's house when we were doing an RT. I think because there was internal, all the yes men of Manmohan or Sonia want to undercut so and so. So, and Arvind had become a prominent RT activist. He had chances to get, anyone would have given a ticket, yeah. He would have won from Sundarnagari hands down. And I used to keep saying, I said, just join politics if you want to, such a kida. No, this is not what we do. And I remember, I said, I don't know whether I should say this. I had a huge argument with him once that he never used to vote. I was like, you want to change? I said, this is, and I remember, and he reasoned it with me. He said, how many RTs have you filed in your life? I said, none. He said, I've filed about 500. Is your one vote every 5 years more valuable? Is my involvement in democracy more valuable? Holding them accountable. He said, vote kya karna hai? Waste of time hai. Now, of course, he wants that vote. You see? so think, but, people change, they evolve, you agree, you disagree. But I have, by accidents of meeting people, and, some I knew because of who I knew. Sometimes I've just been able to learn from people who have, you may like them, you may hate them, but they have pulled off shit that is fucking unbelievable. And I think for that's a privilege, that is pure luck. There are people way more talented, way smarter, way more hardworking, who just haven't had that luck or access.
So I want to double click on a bunch of things here, and after the break we will talk about politics, of course, and we will talk about media, which are the two big themes I want to talk to you about. But before we go into the break, an observation and a story. And an observation is here you've pointed out what is common to all of these guys. Arvind saying that doesn't matter how big the goal is, just start doing it. Or Gulzar Saab just writing for 4 hours every day. And I've often thought that I meet two kinds of writers, and one kind of writer is someone who's in love with the idea of being a writer, ki main writer hu, main award jeetunga, all of those things. And the other kind of writer just wants to write, whether they see themselves as writers necessarily or not. And I've always said that what is important, one thought experiment I kind of unleash on my writing students in my last webinar with them is put 100 people in a room, and there are 100 writers, right? And they range from excellent writers to good writers to mediocre to bad to Up India writers, whatever. You've got the whole you've got the whole spectrum. I had to throw that in there. I knew you'd laugh. So, so you have that whole spectrum of writers out there, and you ask them what their goals are. And you won't know the difference between them, because they'll all have great goals. In the Donald Trump's words, in all caps, my goals are the best. But you ask them what their processes are, and you will immediately know who are the great writers and who are the shit writers, because processes matter. Just that notion of Gulzar Saab entering his writing gym every day, writing 4 hours every day, which means that when he actually gets a specific thing, or when he's actually writing for a specific goal, it is likely to be so much better than it would otherwise have been, which is inspiring. Another story I want to throw out there, I agree with everything you said about privilege and luck. You and I, neither of us would be sitting here if not for having basically won the lottery of life again and again and again.
Right.
What makes me really hopeful about these current times is that I see young creators who are beginning to transcend these barriers of, privilege and luck and all of that. And one person who's impressed me particularly is, have you heard of Mohammed Salim Khan?
No.
Okay, so Mohammed Salim Khan is known as MSK, And he's a vlogger. I've been watching a lot of vlogs on YouTube and toying with the idea of starting one myself. He was born in a village in West Bengal, and his family kind of came to Mumbai when they were very young. And they lived in a chawl somewhere, extremely poor. And he told this story during a talk, which I'll also link, but I find it very inspiring. And the opposite of kind of privilege. So he's in this chawl in Mumbai with his family. And when he's 16 or 17, I think when he's in his teens, his mother, his siblings, they go back to the village. And then they get a phone call saying, your father's gone mad. So, literally mad. So come back to Bombay. So they go back to Mumbai and they find that all the belongings in the house are outside the house in that chawl. And the father's alone inside the house and he's lost it. But they take him for treatment and they manage to get him treated. And after he's treated, his mother asks his father that, you remember we used to have this trunk where we had saved up everything that we had over 15 years. All our savings were in there. Do you remember where that trunk is? And he says, so I was in an auto and the guy asked me for change and I didn't have change, so I gave him the trunk. So they basically lost everything, right? And this kid is 15 or 16, MSK. And at this point in time, he decides two things. He says, one, I will buy my parents a house in Bombay. And two, because he is a young teenager, I will have this particular super bike that I would really like to ride. And he does it all. And he does it all by being a creator in today's economy. So he's got a vlog which I'll link from the show notes. And again, same work ethic, working damn hard. Like one of his vlogging ethics is that every day kuch na kuch jana chahiye. There are days when he's traveling, when he's put out 3 videos in a day, which is not trivial, you would know. And he's kind of done that. So that's inspiring. Now that's obviously, it's something that's starting to happen recently. Privilege and access and those things still matter for a hell of a lot. It's people like us who are visible and have the kind of chances that we do. But I just, that's, if there is one thing that kind of makes me hopeful in these sort of dark times, it is that technology is empowering people.
No, absolutely. There's no doubt. Dude, I'm in court against India today.
Yeah.
Someone who had hired me as a reporter. And I remember, back then, Kali, would often be in office. I mean, I guess she was working on something or the other. I mean, I am up against a company that I could not even think of. Like, if AP would walk in, we'd all stand up,
Yeah.
Of course, and that's because of the internet. I don't have to buy everybody, 3 crore license, have 100 crores to, run a newsroom. Of course, there's no doubt about that. Though I still think that what technology has done for influencers is good and bad, because this is something one of my favorite comedians has said often in his rant, that, you ask any youngsters today, he was quoting some research that they did in the US, some like insane 50-60% people, what do you want to be as a profession? An influencer. He's like, dude, this generation is fucked. If like over half of them want to be influencers, that is their ambition, that is their goal, we're done.
Was it Warhol who came up with that phrase about being famous for being famous?
Oh, was it?
I don't know. I don't know who came up with it.
I think that was a post-Warhol thing. I think that was someone observed that about Kardashians. Kardashians, as I've been told.
No, I remember this from before, actually. Before famous for being famous. But whatever, could have been McLuhan also, I don't know. So let's take a quick commercial break, and on the other side of the break, we shall talk about politics and activism and, of course, the media. Do you want to read more? I've put in a lot of work in recent years in building a reading habit. This means that I read more books, but I also read more long-form articles and essays. There's a world of knowledge available through the internet, but the problem we all face is, how do we navigate this knowledge? How do we know what to read? How do we put the right incentives in place? Well, I discovered one way. A couple of friends of mine run this awesome company called CTQ Compounds at ctqcompounds.com, which aims to help people up-level themselves by reading more. A few months ago, I signed up for one of their programs called The Daily Reader. Every day for 6 months, they sent me a long-form article to read. The subjects covered went from machine learning to mythology to mental models and marmalade. This helped me build a habit of reading. At the end of every day, I understood the world a little better than I did before. So if you want to build your reading habit, head on over to CTQ Compounds and check out their daily reader. New batches start every month. They also have a great program called Future Stack, which helps you stay up to date with ideas, skills, and mental models that will help you stay relevant in the future. Future Stack batches start every Saturday. Also, check out their Social Capital Compound, which helps you master social media. What's more, you get a discount of a whopping 2500 rupees, 2500 if you use the discount code UNSEEN. So head on over to CTQ Compounds at ctqcompounds.com and use the code UNSEEN. Uplevel yourself. Welcome back to The Scene and the Unseen. I'm chatting with Abhinandan Sekhri about a lot of things. So I'm very curious about the activism bit, because it seems at one level to be fueled by an idealism that one doesn't always expect from journalists, say, or people who are, in the media and so on and so forth. And before we get to the activism per se, I'm curious about your conception of journalism. Like, in a sense, you said you were an accidental journalist, you joined Newstrack. At what point do you actually start thinking about what is journalism, what is its purpose, are there any higher ideals involved? I mean, obviously working with people like the people you worked with makes a difference to that, but how do you kind of formulate what is good journalism, what is bad journalism, and where is this good journalism and bad journalism to be defined apart from the craft?
See, I often say that I don't call myself a journalist. I have often corrected people at, events. I'm introduced as a journalist. I say, I'm not a journalist. Call me a news professional or an entrepreneur. Because the word journalist suggests reporting. For me, that's important. And I haven't done any reporting in years and years. I mean, I may have done one story for News Laundry, which was more just Googling, figuring out, putting two and two together and writing a piece on that. When I was at Newstrack, I did some journalism. Yes, during election, you were expected to do some reading up, ask questions, put some kind of story together. We did a series in the run up to, I think there was an election 97. Was there an election 97 or 96? I mean, run up to that election, we did a series in partnership with BBC, where I think the BBC anchor, her name was Nisha Pillai. She had come down, the producer had come down. So, putting that together, I was part of the production team, although I've had a reporter's role. But because I could go nights, I was always said, okay, you put this together. So I was involved in the production of that. So for me, good journalism should have the following. But this is a list of things that it should have. It could have more. The facts must be vetted and accurate. 2, there must be a context to the story. It cannot be a standalone story. You must lay the world that the story exists in. And this is as far as the information that you're giving to the audience is concerned. You must put as many sides of the story of the facts. I'm not saying it has to be a monkey balancing, but you can't say that this one is corrupt. You have to have, and this is something that we've, a lot of activist organizations have wanted to partner with News Laundry to do reports. And I know they mean well, but they send us a video report, where 5 people have accused the SDM of corruption. I said, have you asked the SDM? No. Have you sent an email? No. Can you only day after tomorrow because it's so far from the village? There's a lot of organizations, grassroots organizations, and their, correspondents are just the village folk. They can't go 40 kilometers tomorrow to get a bite. Yeah. They forgo a day's salary. Now, and I really want to work with them. But journalistically, that is not a story I can put out, no matter how much I agree with them and their cause. Because you got to ask the guy, are there any other sides to it? 2, it has to be relevant. To the choice of story has to be, there has to be some purpose to the choice of it. It can't be by kuch bhi. I mean, it may have these things, but it's not. So that is good journalism. But most importantly, when do you do story about what? Now, if today someone is to ask me, is the story of road being blocked in Mahim Junction, Mahim, Bombay, because of namaz, a story or not? Yeah, it's a story. Is it the story that I should do today? No. And it is not because you want to hide one thing. It is the story on Kalmadi's corruption. Let's say I get one more, Kalmadi corruption has been done. But suppose you get one more angle. कि भाई ये भी हुआ था. मैंने कहा ठीक है, मतलब it is journalism, but it's not good journalism. Is that relevant today? Your journalist, when you say it's the first draft of history वाला जो cliche है, तो भाई it has to be relevant for today, na? And it has to be fueled by a sense of wanting to make things better. That has to be the purpose. Now, that why someone does something is going to be very vague and very broad and very. But for me, when I'm hiring people for News Laundry, and I'm not saying there's no room for that other kind of journalism, that I just do it because I'm good at it, I'm smart, I have access to so and so. But then maybe News Laundry is not the place for you. Because what I consider good journalism is you are doing it from a sense of curiosity because you want to make things better. And that is, to me, more or less what good journalism should have. Can have other stuff, but it should have these things for sure.
So, we'll come to politics later, because now that we started talking about journalism, and I thought we'll go from sort of where that idealism developed to activism, and that seemed like a natural segue. But let's talk about the media for a while, and we'll come back to politics. And I'll push back mildly on a couple of these things, because I think this conception of journalism that you kind of spoke about is relatively recent. You could even say that it started, say, with Walter Lippmann's book Public Opinion in, I think, 1910, 1911, and all of that, and gradually evolved over a period of time from there. And I'm not saying that any of these are wrong. I'm just saying that there are added shades I'd like to kind of talk about. For example, one way in which the media certainly changed, say, from when you would have started with Newstrack to today, is that back then there was a broad consensus on the truth. There was something called mainstream media, which was basically mainstream, which was all of the game. There was a broad consensus on the truth. There might have been slight ideological shades here and there with different major publications. The Hindu will be a little left and so on. But in general, there was a broad consensus ki duniya aisi hai. And that's because very few people really had the tools of publishing, the tools of distribution, all of those things. Now, what's happened over the last few decades is that has kind of obviously by now changed completely, and everything is dispersed. And of course, there are good and bad sides to that. The good part obviously is that everyone is kind of empowered, and anyone can, add their voice to that mix, like indeed News Laundry have done, and You're Fighting India today. And the bad part, of course, is that everything seems to be a narrative battle today. There are people for whom reality just doesn't matter. It's, you build your narrative of the world, you choose your tribe, and whatever fits that works for you. And that's a story you want to hear. So I might consider News Laundry to be a journalistic outlet and Op India to be not a journalistic outlet. But in a sense, they are fulfilling similar functions at opposite ends, where people have similar views of the world, and you might be feeding that view of the world with facts and figures and all of that. My broader question was that, when you speak about you've been sent a story from a village, and your point is, listen, you haven't done the rigor. You haven't gone to the SDM and asked him what he thinks of the allegations. And the way I look at it is, when it comes to sort of information, there are many parts to the puzzle. You want to put together as complete a picture as you can, but you'll never get the whole picture.
There's no God's theory.
Yeah. And then there are other people who cannot put together as complete a picture as you, but as long as they give some parts of the picture, I actually think that is legit. And I don't even know whether I'd call it journalism. It's not journalism, but it is still legit. And to think of the term journalism as a monolithic thing, so I'm kind of rambling and thinking aloud, but I'm saying that, like, one of the things that I have learned at our age is that, there are many things I used to think of in a particular way conceptually, and I've realized that I need to rethink them. I need to rethink what this means. I need to rethink what a book is. Does a book have to be 100,000 words? Like earlier in the 90s, we were restricted by the formats. An article is 800 words, a book is 100,000. A Hollywood film is 90 minutes, a Bollywood film is 3 hours. And over time, I've realized that, especially in the modern age, these concepts have kind of broken down for me. And similarly, when we define journalism in a kind of a rigid way, and I understand that you're defining it in this particular way because there's a certain kind of rigor you want, and you've defined that as News Laundry's mission, and that's great, and that's as it should be. But I think that there has to be space for all of this stuff to also go on.
So I don't disagree with you. I think that is also journalism, and a kind of journalism that fulfills a certain... I'm not overwhelmingly in agreement, but I'm not in disagreement either. I think it's an interesting thought. I think there's space for that thought to be entertained and maybe explored and investigated and see what emerges. But yeah, it seems like a rational position to have. What I disagree with you is that Op India and News Laundry are two sides of a coin. Op India has no ground reporting. They have outright fabricated lies.
I don't, by the way, just to clarify, I don't mean two sides of the same coin in a journalistic sense, because they're not journalists.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
mean,
So that's what I'm saying.
I mean, in a narrative sense.
Yeah. So our bedrock is ground reports. Now that ground report could lead anywhere.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, since I may be the face of News Laundry and I'm identified as liberal, our reporters are not ideologically as committed as you might think. Many of them are not ideologically committed, which is why I like them. They do not think this side is right or that side is right, because they're young, so they still have that doubt. I mean, I have some fantastic, talented people. We go with this is what is on the ground. Now, one may choose to say that we are exploring stories that tend to be more against the BJP, therefore subscribe to the liberal narrative. But that is because the BJP is in power, and in 2012 when we started, the Congress was a punching bag, and anyone can go to 2012 and see that stuff. But what we do is reportage. It is journalism. What Op India does is not journalism. So, I mean, and I don't want to give them any more, time or mentions, because I think it's a really vile gutter level thing. And just because, that has a certain audience, that is not enough for me to take someone like that seriously from a perspective of the craft. From a perspective of society decay, just like it's important to take an Arnab seriously, it's important to take, measles seriously, it's important to take COVID seriously, it's important to take Op India seriously as a disease, which needs to be addressed. But if you're talking about the craft, that is that space. So that is one important thing. And I think the whole my entire flirtation with activism happened because of my deep sense of injustice that always bothered me. And it irritated me at many levels. And I think that is why I saw in Arvind someone who I liked. I was like, this guy is taking on someone who needs to be taken on. For a while, I voted Mayawati. Now, I was at that time, it was, which election was this when, I mean, of course, she didn't win a single seat in Delhi, but what pissed me off was that friends of mine, and they were good friends, we'd be, at dinners and parties and the Delhi scene, and you belong to a certain privileged set, and so you have active social life. BJP wasn't fashionable then. ठीक है, कांग्रेस को देंगे वोट, या ये करेंगे वो करेंगे, ठीक है, थोड़ा कुछ बीजेपी को दे देंगे कुछ. It wasn't as polarized as it is now. But when I'd say मैं मायावती की पार्टी दूंगा, they're like, that big pin drop silence. हैं? Why Mayawati? I was like, why not? You know how corrupt she is? I was like, do you know how corrupt pretty many of your Congress leaders are? Just because they're DOSCOs, it's fine. क्योंकि कईयों के बेटे हमारे साथ ही बैठे होते थे. And what I realized was Mayawati's corruption was a special kind of corruption that needed to be pointed out, while others was not. So it wasn't about corruption. It was about belonging to... So I think it may stem from, and I'm just maybe dissecting myself, although I haven't really done any major introspection and seen where this comes from. Maybe it was that, in the privileged set, I was not as privileged as privileged. So, that thing that fucking, always root for the underdog. Whether it was just that I grew up with, a set of parents who I didn't see them do anything wrong in their lives. Like fucking nothing. Like sometime I do kuch to kar lete yaar. Koi bangla chhod dete. Like nothing. Get screwed over by people who were corrupt and, dicks. Maybe it was that. But that is why I think, there was no reason for us to start News Laundry. Small Screen was doing very well. We had, like I said, shows, ads, we were doing everything, man. Sarkari programs, private programs, award-winning ads. We were the game in town. But कीड़ा था यार, News Laundry चालू करना है. And I remember my partner saying it, yeah. Dude, fine, ठीक है, you had your little fun, don't fucking fuck up the climb. I mean, now you're going to go separate, we need to put so much more money in it. VC funding will come in, we need to separate offices, we need to do compliance, we need to do all this. Fuck it, let's just make travel shows, food shows and make money and, But when I get up every morning, I get up fucking excited. Yeah. I'm down to get to office. Let's fucking pick another fight today. Let's do this. And that is very addictive for me. I don't care. Today, I don't care if I am driving into my friend's farmhouse in any case, which I think is a very luxurious gadi, which costs 15 lakh, where everybody's gadis are 1 crore and above. I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck I'm wearing track pants or chappals. But when I wake up every morning, I am excited. I am saying, let's pick a fight today. And that to me was something that attracted me to Arvind. That's something that attracted me to Madhu. So yeah, I think that is the basic Kida. And as long as that Kida is there, I guess I'll be excited by what I do. I mean, I loved, by the way, I mean, we probably won't discuss it because it's not of an interest to you. Shooting Highway on a Plate was a magical experience. Like 7 years to travel across this country by road. Like how many people do you know who can say, I have traveled to every state in this country? A. B, by road. Over 7 years with, 3 of my closest friends. Roque, Mayur, Prashant. Like fucking lade, jhagde, fucking tore each other's eye. Because you're on the road, bloody, when you drive from bloody Delhi to Kolkata to bloody Arunachal, Nagaland, you're going to get on each other's nerves also, yeah. But man, what one learns about patience, about restraint, about not holding grudges, about letting it fly when you have to, about a fight is not the end of the world. It is just something you deal with and move on.
Okay, so I am going to defy your expectations and talk a bit more about that, but in a bit, just to kind of continue with the thought. And first of all, when you were musing about, why did I support Mayawati? Was it because I was less privileged than them? I think sometimes your privilege is not always a causation for the way you behave. I think, people can have opinions independent of where they come from, though obviously those do play a part. So here's my question. We often talk about journalism as having this sacred ground, that these are the values, and you named some values of the craft, that this is a rigor you should show. But we'll often, all those cliches will come up about how you comfort the afflicted, afflict the comfortable, and all of that, which mean a lot to me as well. And at the same time, it's a business. So, a publisher will tell you कि भाई मैं charity नहीं कर रहा हूँ, I have,
Correct.
profit बनाना है. That is my dharma. And I get that completely. That is completely rational. Now, one way of looking at it, and I strongly feel that it is true, is that even for the kind of news that you do and what journalism should be, that there is a market, that market will pay, and we'll come to that later about how, the implications of that model and how I believe it can work. And I think it's working for you to some extent. But here's a thought experiment. Supposing that market was not there, supposing the whole country was full of people who don't care about that kind of journalism, they just want narratives. And by the way, I have to say again, I'm sorry, it almost seems like, I implied an equivalence between you guys and Op India. I was just speaking in the narrative sense, what I think about them. So, in a thought experiment, that there is no market at all for this, and I don't believe that to be the case. I'm hopeful that there is a market for the kind of work you do. But assuming that there is no market for it at all, my sense is that you would do it anyway. Mm-hmm. That there are people who would do it anyway. There would be a handful of people, but they'd get the job done anyway.
Yes.
Which makes it a little bit like an idealistic project. It's like saying that this is my dharma to do this, and I will do this. And even if there's no one reading it and no one wanting it, I still kind of have to do it. How much do you see yourself, therefore, as fundamentally an activist even now? Like I kind of, in my mind, when I was thinking about it, I broke it up into two. That uska activism hai, and these are the things we'll talk about. Uska media ke bare mein, these are the things we'll talk about. But during this conversation, it strikes me that they're actually the same thing, that you are an activist for what is your sense of this?
Now, this term activist is something that I never described myself as until I was described as one in one of these talk shows, activist, Jan Lokpal movement. I'm like, dude, I'm not an activist. I'm a film producer. I mean, a TV show producer, a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker. I'm not an activist. Because for me, it was never a full-time thing. It was something like, for example, when we did the first, Dharna Against Amendments, I had worked with Meghna on her film, Filhal. And that time, the hero of that was Palash Sen. He's the lead singer of Euphoria. So I had become friends with Palash at that time. So I told her, I know Palash. तो इस पलाश को बोला कि गाएगा वो यहाँ, सारी कॉलेज वाले आ जाएंगे. तो Palash came with Euphoria and he sang कि freedom and this charging up everybody. And he didn't know head or tail about RTI. He came because Niku बोल रहा है, दोस्त है, ठीक बोल रहा होगा, honest बंदा है, पहुंच जाता हूँ. I remember he said, हिला दो, यहाँ से दूर नहीं है पार्लियामेंट हाउस, हिला दो, वहाँ की सुन रही है Sonia Gandhi. And we had to calm down. We are not like picking a fight with Sonia Gandhi right now, because she's the only hope of RTI. Because Manmohan was killing it, she was trying to. So is Palash an activist? My assumption, and this is I think where it comes from while growing up, my assumption was, and it hasn't changed that much, that's still my expectation, and I know it's doesn't pan out usually, but we all should do whatever we can in our own way to make things better. Like the chartered accountant of PCRF, and it was chartered accountant's nightmare, because we would get some grant from something, and because the government were always scrutinizing you, he was working for us for free. If anyone needed to be represented in court, Prashant ji was doing it for free. Prashant Bhushan comes from a privileged family, but there were others. So whenever I say he's an activist, so I would always think, and I've thought this through. I'm just not thinking aloud, because this question I've thought it through. I don't see myself as an activist. I don't see Prashant as an activist. I don't see Aruna as an activist. I don't see Nikhil Day as an activist. I see them as doing something that they enjoy while holding the system that should make that possible to be honestly done accountable. And in making it accountable, it is taking a disproportionate time for them to do that, rather than, what is Arunaji's mission? To run Barefoot College, to run a basically place where people who don't have money can have skills, have access, do stuff to become empowered, financially better off than they are. Now, in so doing, bloody she has to do RTI. What do I want to do? I want to create a reader-funded news platform that takes no ads. I don't want to be fighting Kalipuri in court. I don't want to be fighting bloody Times Now in court, but I am fighting both of them. I don't want to be fighting Sakal in court, but I'm doing that. I don't want to be dealing with IT raids in my office, but I'm dealing with that. And coming at 11:30, bloody keeping me there, sitting at 1 o'clock answering questions which have no head or tail. So does that make me an activist? No, I want to do my job, which excites me. If you get in the way, I will fight you. And I think that is what Prashant does. That is what Arvind used to do. That is what Arunaji does. That is what Nikhil does. That is what, I'm guessing everyone who calls themselves activists do. They are doing what they think is, excites them, gives them satisfaction, and gives them 2 meals a day, or whatever their aspirations are. And if you get in the way, we will fight you.
In a certain way, for some people, activist has almost become a bad word. But I was just kind of thinking in a different kind of semantic sense, and thinking even your journalism is a kind of activism.
Yeah, but I don't think it's a bad word. I don't find the word bad or anything. It's just that it doesn't sit on my shoulders. So I've always wondered, like, when someone calls me, and now senior journalist, I say, now I'm senior, I'm a journalist too. I'm a news entrepreneur. I'm trying to create a model, which I was told is impossible, but I was convinced of. And I'm fucking thrilled that, and what you were saying, that if there was not a single reader, you're right, I would still do this. I would convince them one at a time. I would come to your show and convince you. Then I'd convince him. When we started, Amit, investors ko to chodo. They to said, bhai, shut the fuck up. News supported by subscribers. Ad se chal raha hai sab kuch. CPI tab tha 350-400 था CPI. आज क्या CPI? 15 रुपए, 12 रुपए. वो जो क्लिक्स पर इंडेक्स जो YouTube के प्री-रोल पोस्ट-रोल ad, it's not even 1/10 of what it used to be in 2012 when we started. And we started in 2012 because I was busy shooting Heaven and Plane, and Madhu used to get very irritated. He says, तू दिल्ली में तो कभी होता ही नहीं. When are we going to start this? Otherwise, it would start in 2011. Not only were the investors completely unconvinced that you can have a model like this, friends of mine, who meant well for me, they said, Nikku, we want you to do well. तू अच्छा कर, तू तरक्की कर, फल फूल. लेकिन ये बहुत ही घटिया आइडिया है तेरा, कुछ नहीं होना. I convinced 10 people first. ठीक है, दोस्ती थे यार, सब्सक्राइब कर लो प्लीज यार, 100 रुपए महीना, ऐसे क्लिक. 10 के 100 हुए, 100 के 300. आज कितने? We probably have 12-15,000 paying subscribers. We can say we are sustainable without any advertisers. We don't need ads. I don't fucking have to ask, Yogi Kejri, his ads at Cheping, bloody, he gives ads to Arnab also, yaar, baaki to chodo. I mean, all the stuff that we make fun of others, I mean, I understand he's doing politics. His ads are apparently, my friend Sujit Nayyar was saying, yaar, our ads are appearing in Maharashtra papers and go like Delhi government ads. So, अगर आप एड से चलाना चाहते हो, बस अगर पैसा कमाना था ना, मौके की कमी नहीं थी. यहाँ पर 3 डॉस को जैसा भी तिहाड़ में है लेकिन बहुत पैसा छापते हैं लोग यहाँ, और मैं जानता हूँ कैसे छापते हैं. वो नहीं था पर्पस. So we have grown it from 0 subscribers to these many subscribers, like convincing them 10 at a time, 12 at a time, 15 at a time. I'll probably shamelessly plug it on your show also.
You must. I will
pay
plug
to
it on
keep
my
these
show.
free. In fact, for your readers, we'll give a discount and we'll figure something out right now.
Okay.
But see, Amit, whatever I have done by instinct. And that is when also I started working Newstrack. I had just taken my final year exam. I hadn't even got my result. I'm not highly educated. I'm a BA pass. Economics honors. That's a good course to do.
I'm
And
also just a BA pass, yeah.
So, many of the kids who work for me have done something from Amsterdam University. Someone has done something from Oxford. Abhi, my editor, Mehraj, is in Oxford on some
इसीलिए तो वो बताते हैं आपको बिजनेस कैसे चलाना है, आप सुनते नहीं हो.
So, I've done things by instinct. Like, when I quit Aaj Tak, me and Prashant had no idea what the fuck we're going to do. And like I said, that self-doubt, when you turn on the TV and complete laddus are sitting and reading the news and you're holding your head, this guy is like there and we are bloody struggling like chutiyas, fucking late night, going to railway stations, getting a tape, shooting ourselves, editing. And I can shoot, I can edit, I can wrangle cable, which I've done. I have never been ashamed to take a job, whether it was to pick up tea or whether it was to wrangle cable. And I remember Nasir Sahab was such a gentleman when we were on the set of Monsoon Wedding. And a lot of the kids there who were working were friends of Mira's friends' kids or, other privileged kids. There were very few kids who were really, assistant material. Most of them were rich kids having a nice September, Mira's shooting a film. So, the cast came, the most well-known cast member was Nasir, and they said, Nimbu Pani lani. So you had spot boys. That spot boys hadn't come very early in the morning. So I had no problem picking up Nimbu Pani and getting them. And I remember Nasir said, Niku, don't do this. We'll wait for it. I said, no, I'm okay. He says, no, you don't have to serve us tea and coffee on a tray. You're not a spot boy. I said, I don't fucking care. Let's just get the shit done. So, like wrangling cable, I was 24 at that time. Some of the other productions were 21, 22. And a small screen had been set up. Chadar had been made and it had won an award in San Francisco. And I was wrangling cable. I don't have a problem with it. I've never been shy to work. So that Kida is what, like I said, everyone said it's a shit idea. So everything is by instinct. When we quit Newstrack, let's do something. We'll do a travel show. ठीक है, एक documentary हो गया, अब क्या? We'll wait. साला हुआ ना, highway on a plate. So actually, a lot of people are very surprised when they know me otherwise, that, my rational approach to life. I believe in God and I pray every day. And that is something a lot of people who know me can't. This is like, seriously, like, what the fuck? Like, you who's rational, who's scientific, who has a evidence-based approach. Because the things that have happened to me are just, there has to be some other reason. Like, in 99, you are quitting a job saying that we'll make travel shows when there is no fucking market for travel shows. It doesn't exist. There are 4 channels. Cable TV has just come in. There used to be only one when you started. 3 years later, you have the fucking biggest travel show in the country. Like, what explains that? We'll do news laundry. Friends telling you, no, tu duba dega, dono company duba dega, khud ko bhi duba dega, jail pahunch jayega. We are sufficient, self-sufficient. We don't need anyone's fucking funding. We have subscribers. What explains that? So I have a deep faith in a higher being that is watching over. Now, if you ask me why the fuck is he letting others starve, I'm sorry, I don't know those answers. But someone has been very good to me. And I can't explain why.
So I'll link a column in the show notes I've written just about how we underestimate luck, in the sense that just the fact that we are born at all is really a few trillion to one, and I actually tried to calculate the numbers and all of that. So you'd imagine that it's just incredibly unlikely that we should even exist. But the point is, it is inevitable that some things will exist. Similarly, it is inevitable that some people will get very lucky. Like, even I feel I got extremely lucky in the sense, for 5 years ago, if I were to pitch to anyone कि यार मैं 4 घंटे की podcast करूँगा, 4 घंटे लोगों से audio में बात करूँगा, I would have been kicked out of the room, right? But luckily in these times I could just do it and it can work. So I think some people inevitably get lucky. So I don't think that's necessarily evidence of a higher force. In fact, mathematics indicates that there will be some people who are extremely lucky, and it just happens to be you and me sitting here. But regardless of that, and I'll kind of get back to that. And by the way, Monsoon Wedding, I would have carried cables for that as well, because that's one of my two favorite Indian films of that decade, along with Luck by Chance. I think they're just both incredible, gorgeous
And the
films.
stories I have from that set are just magical. They're funny, inspiring, ridiculous, everything. It was an insane. That the film got made is a miracle.
Yeah, so, Monsoon Wedding being such a dear film to me, I'd love to hear your stories from there. Go ahead.
So, Randeep Huda's hand broken was not part of the script, but he had fractured his hand, so it had to be woven into the script. That was, but now this is the cultural kind of friction that happens, and it's not always sexism, but it's okay. You tell me what you make out. What will you call this? Now the camera department, the cameraman was Declan Quinn. He had shot Casino, and he was one of the top 10 cinematographers of the world. So I was so thrilled ki bhai, I'm carrying the camera, because he was in his late 50s at the time. And it was, you seen Monsoon, and it's all on the shoulder. So I was wrangling cable with him, and as soon as Meera called cut, I was to take the camera from him. It was an Arri, 16mm Super 16 film, learning how to change the film roll, etc. So that, because it's hard on the shoulder. So, long shots when Ria was, I think, Vasundhara's name, when she's running out, he had to run, tuck, 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 tuck. You have to make sure it doesn't trip over. And he wasn't a young man at the time. So now the entire camera department was, there was this one young girl, and other than a few of us, the entire crew had come from overseas. अब वहाँ जा रहे हैं, न्यूयॉर्क से क्रू आया है, दिल्ली की सितंबर ह्यूमिडिटी, गंजी सी पहनी है, बनियान, little vest. Acha, we have to go to Chandni Chowk and shoot, so you guys get, the audio locked down, it was sync sound, and get all the production together, location ready. तो अब हम बोले यार, कोई इन लेडीज को बोलो कि भाई आप चांदनी चौक, if you want to go shoot, don't come dressed like this. Because we were in charge of security, and it wasn't, now of course it is very scary things are for security, but that time it was, it's not like we had like bouncers and all. It was assumed ki Nikku, Ruman, Manav, tum log hi kar lena security, just make sure the crowd is away. Now we are saying that now if we say that, don't come to Chandni Chowk, we'll sound like those Abbas, beta aise kapde pehen ke jate kahin. But at the same time we say, boss, agar we have to control security aur kuch ho gaya, hum pit-pita jayenge wahan. Hum teen machudu se kya, what will he control a crowd if, these 5 white girls are coming in their ganjis and, they're two, So the whole jaddo-jahad of, who do you tell that? Can we dress little conservatively when you go to shoot in Chandni Chowk? Can you not expect us to do the security? Or let us be home? Because hamara bhi fir face saving nahi hoga. I remember this was a very interesting conversation that happened. And then there was this one scene, if you remember, when the cops find the guy who's the anchor making out of the Sundara in the car, right? Now that actually was not in a car. That whole scene was in Jamali Kamali. The cans got fogged when they went to New York. They went through the X-ray. So the first shoot was done at Jamali Kamali in one of those old tombs. Now in Delhi to shoot, you have to get like hundreds of permission, iski, uski. So one out police permission, and that was about it. Now you had to do that scene, and Meera said, and it was sync sound, so you couldn't have, it wasn't dubbed, and that time sync sound was very new. So we were in charge of the audio lockdown, just making sure the set is quiet, wrangling cable. Now the cops landed up. They said, "Bas 2 ghante ho gaye, Niklo, you have to get out." And the scene wasn't done. So Meera's instructions to us: so you do what you can. I have to finish this scene. So first you try to talk to the cops outside and tell them to talk quietly, pretend that you are just talking to them while she finishes the scene. Then you keep talking to them, then they start getting in. Then at one stage, I was physically holding a cop back from going into the scene. And he said, "Tune chui kaise meri vardi? Teri himmat kaise hui?" I was like, fuck, I'm going to get beaten up here. And it was like, and this was like later, and we had gone to 12:1, and next morning you had to get to the location at 4. It was a trip like no other. I mean, it was, and the scene, this thing scene. In fact, if you see, and I've also posted this on Twitter, the party scene, Chuniri Chuniri, when Neha's dancing, I'm ordering Bacardi at the bar.
Oh, nice.
Because there was no budget for extras. So whoever is not required immediately, imperatively for this shot, go to wardrobe, put on a pair of shadi clothes and come stand in the crowd as guests. So all those guests are Madhu's, that old lady dancing, that's Meera's mother. There's a couple there, they're friends of hers from Defense Colony. So of course all of us who could be spared for like 5-minute shots went, wore shadi clothes from the wardrobe, came and started ordering Bacardi and started doing stuff like that. So now I freeze that scene where Alia's father, the young girl who, Alia, her father, which is played by Rahul Vora, he's, at the bar talking to someone. So I'm at the back ordering one Bacardi Coke, please. That was my line. And then we were trying to sip as long as we can, hoping that retake per retake ho, so that we get a breather. Because otherwise it was hard work. You
Sipping so much Bacardi.
sipping so much Bacardi. It was a trip, man. It was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. I learned so much on that set.
I'm also curious about, this is media, but at the same time, it seems very different from everything else that you're doing. Did you want to be a filmmaker? I mean, I know you've made many documentaries and done a lot of that, but did you also at some point say that, okay, these are the kind of movies I want to make? And
I have 4 scripts written and sitting at my table for the last 9-10 years. I wrote my first script in 2002 when I was working on Filhal with Meghna.
Wow.
Because I just found the whole experience of filmmaking so bizarre, where most of our time used to be spent waiting for either Sushmita or some star to show up. I was like, dude, on Monsoon Wedding, and that is when I disagreed a lot with people that, Bombay is very professional, Delhi is not professional. Bombay is very professional, Delhi is not professional. I was like, dude, I've just come from a set in Delhi where we shot a film in 26 days.
That was a foreign crew there. That's completely different. Right?
I was like, dude, here I'm spending 4 hours a day just waiting for a star to show up. What are you talking about? What are you even talking about? So that is something I didn't agree with. I didn't get that. And I've written a piece on this also on one of my earlier blogs. But just the whole experience, and our producer Jhamu Sugandh, I don't know if you remember, there was that Bharat Shah, he was laundering money. So Jhamu Sugandh was the guy who produced Hum Dil De Chuke Sanam. He became very big after that. And he produced a whole bunch of films. So there was some inquiry on him back then, I don't know. So halfway through the film, of course in Bollywood lingo, you have to call him Jamuji, everything G. Jamuji was missing. So no one knew whether the 5th schedule will happen or not. I was finding it bizarre. Then, usually an AD is a faltu, like you will not be hanging with the stars. Because I was Meghna's friend and she was the director, so places where the AD did not really belong would go, like Sushmita's birthday bash, so, after the whole thing. Because when you're shooting a film for that duration, it's just those people who are your life. And which is what I find very strange, which is why I have a thesis. Anyone who works in showbiz in Bollywood is not what we would call normal emotionally. That is their normal. But in our world, that would be an unhinged, an unequilibrium place. Because you work with such intense proximity with the crew for like a long time, where you have affairs, you have crying, jhagda, ladai, everything with those people. Then you move on to another crew and you might not see these people ever again. Or you might not see them in 3 years. Like even some of the people who I meet from, Monsoon Wedding today, it's been 20 years. We still meet like we are fucking chuddy buddies. We are not. We were together for 3 months. 3 intense months when you were on set for 16, 14, 15, 12 hours. So you were like sadhooing together, bitching people out together, laughing together. So you get very intense bonds. That's why a lot of affairs happen on film sets. Because that is your life. Like normally, if you have a birthday party or I have a birthday party, the 20 people there will be my close friends. If I'm having a bigger party, then the peripheral, circle, then the further circle, अगर तुम शानदार पार्टी कर रहे हो. लेकिन अगर आपकी 20 लोगों की पार्टी है, आपके बचपन के दोस्ती होंगे. अब वहां मुझे बड़ा अजीब लगता था यार, 20 लोग हैं इस पार्टी में, उसे मैं भी हूँ चूतिया. अब मेरा ना लेना ना देना, और वो भी चूतिया, वो भी देखे, इसको भी नहीं पता, इसको देव ऑल्सो मेट ओनली. मैंने कहा दोस्त कहाँ है इसके? एंड आई रियलाइज कि बस बॉलीवुड में ना, जब यू आर ऑन अ प्रोजेक्ट, आपका दोस्त किसी और प्रोजेक्ट के लिए थाईलैंड में शूट कर रहे हैं, कोई ऑस्ट्रेलिया में, कोई मलेशिया में, क्योंकि अगर आपके सारे दोस्त बॉलीवुड के, अच्छा जो आपके बाकी दोस्त हैं वो फिट नहीं करते इस वर्ल्ड से, वो बॉम्बे से नहीं है. तो सो आई फिगर्ड दैट इमोशनली showbiz you have to be a little unhinged to survive, to have an emotional kind of, to make sense of your world, because your closest friends are changing every film. So many such experiences, I said, yaar, this is a film. So while I was there and I had so much time, I started writing a film and I wrote it. Then I wrote another film. This is about reporting and elections because I saw news is such a ridiculous space. So I have got 4 scripts ready, but you see, you want to do too much in life. I want to do that also, I want to do activism, I want to do news laundry also. So maybe in another 3-4 years when, someone else can take over as CEO of News Laundry and run it.
क्राउडफंडिंग कर लो, अभी आ जाएंगे.
Yeah, but I think maybe another year it'll be stable enough to just run. Systems will completely be in place. But yeah, I absolutely want to I think cinema, being on a film set is a magical experience. If you've been on a film set, man, it's addictive. And I can see why people get addicted to wanting to make it and spend their lives, go to depression, get into drugs, alcoholism, attempt suicide, but they will not say, fuck it, let me give up and go back and do something else. That pull is so tempting. It is, the stakes are so high. If you make it, you fucking make it, man. And just the buzz, the energy. Like I remember, and also the bitching. I remember, this is one scene I'll never forget. उन दिनों देवदास शूट हो रही थी.
Bhansali
and so there was an accident, and that time a bunch of films were being made. There was this Bas Itta Sa Khwab Hai with Abhishek Bachchan. Filhal was being shot. There were, so Kamalistan में जो 4-5 film set हैं, सब lunch साथ में, at least us lower down people would do lunch in the lawn together with the lightmen, shitemen, etc. And that time this Olive was a new place. So मतलब कालील से नीचे और बांद्रा में वहाँ पर था. It was this new, everybody came back, went there at the end of the shoot. People at my level didn't, but because I was, her friend who would go wherever she was invited. So I would also go there. So we were there, and I don't know whether we were celebrating, a birthday or... So it was, of course, stars. There was, Filhal, there were stars of other films sitting left, right. And there had been an accident on Sanjay Leela Bhansali's set where one of those Storm fans had fallen and it had killed one of the lightmen or the set spot boys. Do you remember this at all?
I don't remember this at all.
But if you Google it, there was a death on Sanjay Leela Bhansali's set, and then Devdas ki shooting band ho gayi. Shuru hogi ki nahi. Now that is when I realized that fucking no one is anyone's friend here. Dude, the thrill of bitching out that this film may stop. Shah Rukh ki film ruk jayegi. And every table was talking about that because I was a fly on the wall. Bhai, mera na lena na dena. No one wanted to talk to side AD. So I was just there because I was eating. So I would go hang out near this table, hang out near that table. Everyone talking about the same thing because it's a very small. It's like, if you think the news world is incestuous, Bollywood is that and more. एक दूसरे की बातें करनी, नेवल गेजिंग, वो सड़े, वो गिरे, वो. तो मुझे बड़ा fascinating लगा. अच्छा, मैंने वहां देखा, थोड़ा गेता और देखा, शाहरुख comes in his typical style, half his shirt tucked in, half out, looking very tired in his jutti type and jeans. Dude, I am not joking. Every table got up, stood in line, like they are doing a Baratiyon ka swagat. Hey, Shahrukh, how are you, man? Everything okay? Oh, man, love you, man. I was like, fuckers, you were not bitching him out like in front of me 5 minutes ago. Have you no shame? I can see you still. But dude, that's the fucking world, man. And I mean, I've given you one instance. There were just so many instances I saw that no one's anyone's enemy, no one's anyone's friend. You are just an ally for the period of your film. Emotionally, that puts you in a state of relationships which I don't consider normal. When I commit to someone, of course, a single guy at 47 saying this, but I don't mean romantically commit. I mean, when I commit friendship to someone and that person is my friend, everybody else is noise. I may be nice to you, I may be friendly with you, but I'm not your friend. My friends remain constant through life. I have old friends who we've been together since you're 6 years old, 8 years, 10 years old. I've made very few new friends in my life. Maybe in my mid-20s, I kind of finished. I've made maybe half a dozen since. But if someone were to say, who are your friends? It's been the same names for years. In showbiz, it's not like that. Which is why, like, for example, Amitabh Bachchan's father died. Like tomorrow, God forbid, my parent, any parent, they all have to die at some point. Who are the people by my side? My friends who knew him, who grew up with him, No, not Amar Singh and Anil Ambani, who I met 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But do you have any close friends? That world doesn't allow it. So I find the whole emotional equilibrium of showbiz and the emotional equilibrium of non-showbiz are very different. Maybe it's different for sports persons. I've never observed them closely. But yeah, I observed that. So I wrote about that. I wrote films. Maybe they'll never get produced. Maybe I'll just leave them, and if someone wants to produce them, I think they're fantastic scripts. Maybe I will one day. But yes, to your answer, I want to make a movie.
मैं आपको लिख के दे देता हूँ. The day you decide, the day you find a CEO for News Laundry and you open this up for crowdfunding, no boss, you'll get the funding. लिख के दे देता हूँ. But we'll come back to that later. From what you said about the emotional equilibrium of Bollywood and how they're shaped so differently, one of the things I've been musing on recently is how what we do changes us in such profound ways. Like just, at the very basic level of my podcast, I'm doing 4-hour interviews or whatever that forces me to research and go deeper than I otherwise would. It forces me to listen. For shorter stuff, you don't listen. It forces me to read a lot more. All of these things. And I feel that changed me in some ways. Now, obviously, you see these changes in a much more extreme and obvious form in something like Bollywood, where you're in those compressed environments of great intensity and so on and so forth. You see those perhaps in the work you do. You see those in politics, where I've always held that politics invariably corrodes character, because you're constantly making compromises and building personas who are not who you are, and eventually the mukhotas you wear become you. I don't know if that's the case with Arvind. You know him much better, but I've always thought of it as a general rule of politics. So what would be your reflections on that, and also to what extent do you think that the kind of work that you do has also shaped you in terms of what you are? Because of course you are I saw the slip of yours where you talk about journalism being a combat sport, and you say that मैं वैसा हूँ, मेरी personality ऐसी है, so it's fit for you. So in a sense that causation is coming, that the kind of work you do is because of the kind of person you are. But does it also work the other way? Because you constantly have to, therefore, in your line of work, especially if you're doing journalism with rigor, as you spoke about, you have to be a constant skeptic. You have to constantly question everything, not be quick to judgment. What's your sense of this?
Well, friends who've known me for years will scoff if you say that I'm not quick to judgment. They find me most judgmental because, have arguments and fight at social dues where you should not do that on political issues, on someone saying something. I wouldn't just let it pass. I'm like, that's not okay. Fuck you. And sometimes people let it pass. So they took it as judgmental. I didn't see that as judgmental. It's just that you don't let certain things slide. But you're right. Things become habits, like smoking, like writing as for Gulzar Saab, following the news, seeing what was the right thing to do at a governance level, following the news in a way which is unhealthy for you. Like, I had gone with my sis for a holiday and we were, driving in the US, the whole, that whatever, Concierge, Colorado River, Grand Canyon, and, you do that whole Vegas. So, wahan bhi I'd keep checking NDTV app, Indian Express app. She said, fucking switch off, man. You can't switch off. That's something on news professionals. Most news people I know can't switch off. Now, I'm sure that takes its toll on us. Mental health. I mean, maybe to someone else, I'm a complete fucking basket case warped. What is the equilibrium? It is different for different people. That is one thing, not being able to switch off. Questioning governance. And also the model you choose. Because we are subscription based, not wanting to go for the click thing. Stuff that is solid, but people think it valuable enough. It's not like I don't want to be News Laundry to be a really big kind of, but I'm in no hurry. It has to be done on our terms. So it does shape you because of the decisions you made it. And many, I've changed my view about many other things. Like about, now the other thing, what you said, I had a very judgmental view on politics and politicians. Now I have a more nuanced view because I understand the game that is being played. I mean, I'll give you some examples of why, considering I was one of the dozen at the, PCRF level when there are several million people in the party, why am I not there? It was the most obvious thing. Arvind contested, Santosh contested, Manish contested. Well, fuck did Nick could not contest. So I knew that was not for me. How did I know that was not for me? Was that when we were running that whole jamboree, circus, call it what you want. Of course, it was an event. We had to get eyeballs. That was the whole idea. I mean, I asked Mayur to come. I asked Rocky to come. They have no interest in activism. They came because they're friends of mine. I said, kal coverage mil jayegi ki Rocky Mayur aayenge. Then you call up a friend, yaar, report lick. Because it is about media management, dude. Let's not kid ourselves. That was a very important one. When Arvind will go on stage, it should be in the evening. People are fucking watching TV. Okay? Now, but we used to be sitting there. So, and again, I think this whole your emotional equilibrium being in a bizarre land, if you have to be a politician, this combination, like I have a theory that bureaucrats have to be either servile or completely obnoxious and bossy. And I asked Mr. Lavasa this in the interview, that either will treat you like you're shit. That means you're below them. But when joint secretary बैठा और secretary आ गया है, director, then yes sir, no sir, 3 hours, sir. Like fucking have some dignity, yeah. Minister आ जाए तो late ही जाएंगे. So if you are going from such servility to such obnoxious arrogance several times a day, you're fucking mentally fucked, yeah. When we would be sitting and, some days there were no crowds would be coming. We have to figure out how do we SMS bhejo, ye karo, wo karo, studio jao. I used to be going from studio to studio, arguing with Singhvi and Sanjay Jha and all. And that's another thing. Me and Sanjay Jha used to have such ugly debates because I was representing Team Anna, what it was called then. I would rather call it Team Lokpal. And he was representing the Congress because he was like a quasi-spokesman of Congress. And we had such ugly exchanges. In fact, we bumped into each other with the Think Fest. And it was a nasty exchange. Now, if we meet, we're friendly. You see, it's changed. Now we have a common... That time, he was my adversary. Now, his adversary was mine. I had, back then, I had very close friends who are now in this camp who would happily entertain me. Today, they will not. So, when we used to be getting these crowds, etc. together, we'd be sitting and I don't know if you remember, you were in Bombay, but that whole Jan Lokpal movement was we hadn't seen anything like this in India. It had become an event. I mean, now the farmers, the numbers that they have are 10 times on their bad day what we had on our best day. They're 10 times more. But is it a television event? No, it's not. 5,000 people on Jantar Mantar was a bigger television event than 1 lakh farmers. Out of him, 20 are dead. Probably it's more, the number is 50. But it's not an event. Our production was a small production, it was a fucking big event every night in prime time. We were all there. During that time, the amount of people who got excited and said, Desh badlenge, next revolution aayi hai. Jazba hum mein bhi tha. We used to get excited jab wo stage se, dil diya hai, we used to feel the... Of course, backstage jaake, we used to be thusoing ourselves and we'd say, bloody Anna's not eating. So many people would say, tumhe sharm nahi aati, tum kha rahe ho, Anna nahi kha rahe. तो मैंने कहा यार भाई तो उसकी चॉइस है मेरे तो मैं कोने में जाके खा लेता था. But there were some guys who wouldn't eat, yeah. Until Anna eats, I won't eat. One of them still works with Arvind till today. I was like, dude, you'll fucking die. Anna's used to it. He's doing this every 2-3 years. You've never done this. You're like 25. Your body's eating up fat faster. He didn't fucking eat till Anna ate. There were people like that at the back. And they're still there within his team. The one thing that fucking used to get my goat, and we know how hard it is to produce this whole event, how hard it is to excite people and want them to make change. You sit in the evening, Ghaziabad mein office hota tha. Some fucking 3 chutiyas will walk in. Tum logo ye karna nahi aata, tum ye ho, tum gande ho, tum wo sade ho. Now, Arvind and Manish should sit and listen to it. हाँ, तो हमें क्या करना चाहिए? अच्छा, आप बताइए. I'd say, fuck you, यार. Who the fuck are you to tell me क्या करना चाहिए? तूने क्या किया लाइफ में? चलते फिरते रोज गाली खाओ किसी से. ना हम सो रहे हैं, ना पैसा कमा रहे हैं, सड़ रहे हैं रोज, और लोग आके लेक्चर देने लग जाते. I used to get very irritated. Arvind said, you can't lose your temper here. I mean, you got to listen to the guy. He has a worse life than you. He is probably in some slum. His life is shit. Your day has been shit, na? His life is shit. Let him come and vent here. I couldn't do that. I'd fucking flip out. And fucking they could sit and listen to people tell them that they are fucking shit every day, having had such a miserable day. I was like, dude, this is not for me, man. I fucking can't do this. I can't sit and really listen to some people telling me I'm a chutia after I've been working my ass off just because his life is worse than mine. I've given you one instance. There were many instances of letting something slide. And I understand. And what fascinates me is that many journalists who have covered politics for much longer than I have, and I'm not saying they should not criticize, they must criticize, but even when they're not publicly criticizing, when they're discussing politics, their understanding of politics is dismal. Politics is not the game you're playing, it's a different game. It's up to you whether you want to play it or not. You play your game. But many of them say, oh, this is what this one should do. I'm like, dude, you have no idea what it takes. When there are 20,000 people joining your party every day, if you think you're going to be doing a due diligence and headhunting on each of them, which one should be allowed and which your party will be like Jayaprakash Narayan Vajo. Hyderabad, where he started. Lok Satta. You'll get one seat at some point and then that is it. You're not a CEO of a board that is vetting people and hiring them. When anyone joins News Laundry, they have 3 stages of vetting. When you're launching a party, there is 0 stage of vetting. They're just fucking coming. Jo chipak gaya, jo nikal liya, khatam baat. I'm giving you a very basic level, but I understood how messaging works. I understood how politics works. I understood what it takes for a bunch of losers in a room to make a movement that became the biggest thing since fucking, Quit India movement or whatever it is, or JP's movement, to a party. I get it. It's not my game. I don't want to play that game. Not now anyway. Maybe, when I'm 60 and I feel that I have 0 fucks to give, like we were talking. But it's a game which is not... What fascinates me is how few people understand that. And what your expectations from that game should be and what your expectations from this game should be. Again, I repeat, that's not to say that one should not impose your values on politics. Otherwise, they will go off the rails. They have to be held to account to what they said yesterday versus yesterday. But it's too complicated. It's too there are too many compromises that I would find hard to.
Did that game change the people who did play it?
Of course it did. But it better have, otherwise they have no business being there. Otherwise they'll have one little spark in the pan and that's the end of it. If they want to grow, they have to learn. And I was telling you about, Barkha, a lot of people critique her and criticize her for a lot of reasons, and some justified, some completely unjustified. But she's a super hard worker for which I have a lot of respect for her. I mean, she works harder than people half her age. And she is a phenomenal learner. She does one fuck up, she knows what the fuck up is. She's got the intelligence to identify it and move on to the best. She will transition with the only person who I've seen who's a better learner than her is Arvind. I've seen him not knowing how to handle 10 people, to figuring that out, to not knowing how to handle 100, figuring out, to fucking knowing how to handle million. And he'll keep fucking up. But the thing is that when that whole thing happened, I remember Tavleen Singh used to keep writing this. This is Niti Central hota tha ek.
Another rag. That was a proto-op India in a way. Right?
Correct. Every third week, this is the end. What a foolish mistake, resigning from chief. Oh my God, master stroke by Amit Shah, that Kiran Bedi. I've worked with Kiran ji. The moment she was made chief ministerial candidate of BJP, I tweeted it and you can see on my Twitter, I was like, dude, BJP is done. They will be happy if they get double digits. Because I've worked with her. She is a star. She can't handle it. I mean, so that, he's resigned, this is the end of the movement, this is the end of the party. That movement and that party, their obituary has been written so many times in print shamelessly after getting it wrong 3 times. And the Times of India piece that I wrote, I was like, the one thing that I can tell you is, this guy, till he is on earth, is not going down. He will fuck up, he will identify his fuck up. He will say, okay, let's fix this, move. And he'll become bigger and better at that game. The game he chooses to play.
So I have a follow-up question here, which is, I just recorded with M.R. Madhavan of PRS yesterday, and I don't know whether that episode will come before this or after, but one of the things we were discussing was how politics and coming to power involves many different games, not one game. And the context in which I mentioned this to him was one game is how to win elections, which a party may master. And if it comes to power, obviously it has mastered. And the other game is governance, where they might be starting with a completely clean slate and have to learn from scratch and all that. And he pointed out how there's a third game after you become a minister, but let's not go there. But in the context of, say, Mr. Kejriwal, whom I don't know personally, and you have obviously known him very closely, and this is a question that could apply to many similar politicians, to in fact many people who enter politics, is that it seems that there are two games here for him. Maybe three, but here are the first two. One game is that you get into the kind of work you do, whether you call it activism or not, social work, whatever, because you have a set of principles, you want to bring about a certain change. That's why you get into it. Then you enter politics, and you're playing actually a different game, where your game is to win power no matter what happens. Those principles are orthogonal. Sometimes they may help, sometimes they may not matter at all, because what you need to do to win power is something completely different. And then you get to power. Now, there's of course a third game of governance on how you make things happen, but let's leave that aside for the moment. It strikes me that there are times where there can be a harsh conflict between these two games. You might, for example, begin with liberal principles, but then to get elected, if you have to appeal to, say, an illiberal polity, if you have to, like one of the things that I have criticized the Aam Aadmi Party on, for example, in recent years, is not speaking up adequately on issues like the abolition of 370 or the CAA NRC protests, or at different points
Well,
in
not
time.
speaking up would still be okay, but endorsing it, saying we welcome what happened in Kashmir.
In Kashmir is to me, it's just, I mean, I don't have words for it. It's just horrendous. And I understand the political rationale which members of the Aam Aadmi Party have given me. That, listen, his focus, his narrative is a governance narrative. He'll do the work in education and health and all of that, and that's what people want. And he will not fight with the BJP on, social issues, because the Hindu vote is what it is.
Or not yet anyway.
And that doesn't sit well with me. I understand the political logic, but what I would then say is that, okay, he might be making some progress, or he might be doing it for reasons that are rational within that second game of getting votes and winning elections. So my personal view is you cannot out Hindutva BJP. But yeah, if you're saying I won't fight on that front, I'll fight on the governance front where I'm in a strong position. I get that logic. But that first game, then I would say you have completely lost it, because then what do you stand for? And I find that there is a certain kind of contradiction there. And I have asked this even in the context of the BJP, because on the one hand, the BJP comes out of the social movement that has certain beliefs that, again, I could not disagree with more strongly. And on the other hand, they also have this great will to power, where no matter what it takes, they will win elections. They'll go to the Northeast and say, "Aap log beef khao. No issues with you guys eating beef." Or politicians that they were abusing one day, they'll welcome into the party the next day, or buy them off when they lose the elections, because there is a will to power. And my question there to, people within the know or people sympathetic to them has always been that, is there a conflict there between their true beliefs and, actually winning the vote? But that's a separate question. You've seen sort of Arvind close up. How would you respond to this? How would you respond to this?
See, I don't want to be too dishonest, and at the same time, I don't want to, kind of use my proximity to him to discuss stuff that I don't think is fair as a friend who's known him for 20 odd years, and through being a co-traveler, at least a part of, and in when the first election happened, I had not joined the party officially. Like, it was this confusing thing. Like, on the one hand, I was a founder member, but I did not take party membership, because when the party was actually announced, there's this whole thing that, when Digvijay Singh said ki khud chunav lad do, it's like you're not agreeing with anything. And he had no intention of fighting any election. Had those continuous barbs and provocation not happened, there would be no AAP today. Now, many people say that, he had a long game plan and all. I can tell you with certainty, it would be a miracle to get him to contest an election, the Arvind of 2006, 2007, even up to 2009-10. अब उससे वोट नहीं डलवा पाए हम, साला इलेक्शन लड़वाएंगे. He was not interested. that continuous barbs, theek hai, this Mani Shankar Iyer, these gutter snipes, these kidas. I remember the way he used to talk.
Yeah.
Contest election. He said, okay, fuck you, I will contest election, yeah. It was pure a fuck you to them, yeah. That is why he contested. Now, when that decision happened, it happened, behind this, where all the emporiums in Delhi, Baba Khadak Singh Marg, वहाँ पीछे एक बड़ी सी एक ऑडिटोरियम है, पता नहीं किसका था, वो दिया था हमें. And it was all that we will do everything by referendum, which of course came to bite him also. शुरू में तो करना चाहिए कि नहीं करना चाहिए, हाँ करना चाहिए, करना. Okay, we have a party and now we are all founding members. But before that, there had been a smaller meeting with Kiranji, with Prashant and all, that the party will be formed. He knows which way the crowd is going to go. And if he wants the crowd to go this way, he will put the proposition in a way where he will win the proposition. Which is why when Prashant and Yogendra ji and all left the party, who left with them? Yeah? Did it impact the party? Kuch nahi hua. See, I'll just come to the 2-3 other things that I learned. One thing I learned is you cannot come on Sunday practice and be the captain of the team. To be the captain of the team, you have to be in the bunkers every day with the boys. If you're not every day with the boys in the bunkers, on Sunday you come and say, I'm the best player because I have a law degree. The players will say, thank you, but you are not a captain. The guy who's been in the bunker every day with us is a captain. They got that wrong. They thought because they are smarter, they are more articulate, they have more degrees, they will prevail. No, that's not how politics works. It is the time you spend, which is why, Rahul, give it 24 hours of your day. The guy had no life for that time, yeah. He wouldn't go home. Whereas the rest of us would go home, नहा धो के फिर मंडे को आते थे. वो तो सारा दिन वही था. तो जब आप आएंगे और वहाँ 1000 लोग बैठे हैं, उनको बोलेंगे, बस मेरी बात सुनेंगे अरविंद, किसकी बात सुनेंगे वो? It's common sense, yeah. And we privileged don't get it. We think because we are smarter, we are more articulate, we are better looking, they listen to us. They won't. Now, what is the question? Sorry. Change. Now, I still have faith in him. I believe his moral compass is too solid to become what many of the others like to do, what a couple. Do I always agree with what he does? No, I don't. Which is another reason I could probably never be in politics. I'd have to go and speak. I mean, I remember when we had to go and defend Kiranji's that essay. I remember when she did that whole Mukhota, she did this whole skit. I remember I was holding my head. I was like, dude, come on, yeah, don't ask me to defend this on prime time at night. Because sometimes you can't defend shit, man. But I think if there is anyone who can take down the BJP in this country, it is him. And they know it. Otherwise, you think they give a shit one state which had none? No. When they came in, Rajnath Singh removed that one ACB that was under him, the anti-corruption. Other Delhi Chief Minister has only one police station under her, which Sheila Dikshit didn't use for 15 years. As soon as he came, he got an affair against Sibbal, Ambani and Moily, remember? And they did that in Parliament. They passed that whatever resolution and that was taken. They have been doing politics long enough to identify the guy who's their biggest threat. It is not Rahul. It is this guy. And like I said, I think that his utterances on Kashmir they just did not sit okay with me. You can't abandon our Kashmiri brothers and sisters like that. And ironically, they came to do the same thing to the Delhi. LG was overruling everything. But I also understand politics enough to know what is being done, why. I will never publicly endorse it and I will always question it because as a journalist, that is called myself a journalist, okay. I consciously wouldn't, but as a citizen, I cannot endorse that. But do I understand that? Yes, I understand that. And do I believe that this guy is morally corrupt? No, that I don't. I will still vouch for him. He's my friend and one can, reject it. If there is someone I have seen who is uncorruptible, it is him. And I will tell you, talking about whose support you should take or not take. We were to set up an RTI Awards. We had 2 RTI Awards. It happened in the Nehru Center, Teen Murti Center. It was in partnership with Z. Mr. Goyal was very fond of Arvind. So Z used to do a lot of support to us, RTI campaigns. They had sponsored the RTI Awards. One year NDTV had sponsored the RTI Awards because I was very fond of him and because I was associated with NDTV. A lot of support. Now, when he wanted RTI camps to be held all over the country, we did this big event in Delhi and there were camps all over. It was called Ghoos Ko Ghoosa, Drive Against Bribes. One can search for it. That internet wasn't so major in 2005, but you'll still find some remnants of that. It was like huge, logistically huge. There were like about 60 organizations from around the country involved, filing RTIs every day. Now, people who had boots on the ground, I have sat with Arvind in South Avenue where, the MP's houses are. Digvijay Singh had his house there. And I'm like, yeah, we are fighting with these guys. We are doing dharnas against these guys. Why are we meeting with Digvijay Singh? He's saying, tujhe RTIs file karwani hai na. They have a cadre who will start doing RTIs, whether it is because Sonia wants to undercut Manmohan, internal politics, इनकी जो भी हो, हमें लेना देना नहीं है. हम बोलते हैं RTI फाइल करनी है, आप बैठो, क्या कर सकते हैं, कैसे कर सकते हैं. I have attended a meeting with, at that time, I don't know whether it was 2004, 5, I don't remember the year, K. Sudarshan was the Sarsanchalak of the RSS. कि आपके इतने cadre RTI करो, corruption is it, हमारा पैसा, हमारा हक, we have a right to know. I was like, dude, like seriously, Sudarshan? He's saying, I'm asking you to join the RSS. They have cadre. If they sit and file RTIs on why is this broken rights, people start doing that. He says people should use the RTI like they use currency. His mission was that everyone should be able to ask, why the fuck is my sadak broken? How much have you spent on MP lads? Where has this money gone? Where is the corruption? Now, a guy like me would never go and sit. And there's another thing about, and this was a big difference in the Sangh and the Congress. And this was even when I was a reporter with News Track. If you go to any of the Congress guy's house, you are treated like a chaprasi. आपकी जगह वहाँ है, चाय पहुँच जाएगी, मट्ठी पहुँच जाएगी, नाश्ता पहुँच जाएगा, अंदर मत आना. When Jagmohan had one of Sushma Swaraj को आप इंटरव्यू करने जाओ, आओ बेटा, it was like an uncle, the middle class uncle. आओ बेटा लड्डू खाओ, चुनाव जीते हैं. When I went to interview Jagmohan, I remember, I had to get back. I didn't want to sit in his office and home and have laddu. But I was sitting in his house on his sofa having laddu while his wife was talking to his aunt. It was very Gharelu type. So, I can't stand the RSS, but I can't deny that when we left Mrs. Darshan's office, he came up to the car to leave us. Yeah, he's the bloody Sarsan Chalak of RSS. I'm Chutiya Nikku. Yeah, who the fuck am I? But when you're dealing with a Sibbal or something, you are a chaprasi. And you'll be treated as such. People are complicated. That doesn't mean I love Sudarshan and hate Sibbal. When are we talking? Are we talking when the UPA time? Yes. Sibbal is my primary combatant. Are we talking 2014? No, he's not. It is the RSS. So, these are things that I understood, I figured, I got he can sit and talk. But will he compromise his basic values? Not the Arvind I know.
So I hope you're right and I won't push back on that, but it does strike me that, like, when I think of what a man's character is, I will think of his actions. And, when you mentioned incorruptible, and I just look at that Kashmir thing, for example.
Yeah.
Right? So, either he genuinely believed that it was a good thing to...
Maybe that I meant it in a very shallow way financially. Maybe ideologically, yeah. Okay, right.
Ideologically, yeah, that's right. What I meant. That
but financially, I know.
Sure, I'm sure even Modi is incorruptible financially. Yaar, usse kya hota hai?
That I kind of disagree, but anyway.
ठीक है, if you have inside info, feel free to give it here. But उससे क्या होता है? Hitler was a vegetarian. तो क्या करें?
So was Manmohan was incorruptible.
Yeah.
And he was a primary. Yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah. I don't disagree with you. But for me, politics is, like I said, very contextual. Like, I would not vote for BSP today. I voted for them earlier. I think it is not... Parties are ideological. Voters should not be.
Well said. Yeah, that's...
Voters should be... If tomorrow Arvind gets, let's say, the Prime Minister's seat and back-to-back victories, I would vote against him in the third one. I don't believe anyone should be given that much of power for that long. Now, Delhi Chief Minister has no power, so I don't really care one way or the other. But, so, like, my dadi used to say, hum to Congresi hain. That generation was like that. Yeah, they took part in the freedom movement. She was in Kanya Mahavidyalaya for her Bapu. They had met these people. Hum to Congresi hain. Meanwhile, my side of the family that had seen the partition had come from Lahore. They were for the Sangh. They're not even for the BJP, which is why Atal lost in 2004. The Sangh wasn't on his team. And the Sangh, today Modi may be bigger than the Sangh, which is many pieces have been written about it. And will it last? Can they? But At least pre-Modi, you could not be bigger than the Sangh, because people like my grand aunt, from they were extended relatives from my father's side, from Punjab, when they had come. I mean, just one of them is alive today. Otherwise, there were 5 sisters, all died. We got on well. They were nice. They were wonderful. They weren't bigoted like these bloody Open India types. I mean, that I will say. But they will say, we will vote for who the Sangh says. If the Sangh says BJP, BJP. The Sangh says Congress, we vote for Congress. But what the Sangh says. So, that is that generation of voters. Our generation of voters should be what is prudent. Who can take down A? Who can take down B? Is he the perfect candidate? Maybe not. Was Mayawati the perfect candidate? No. But I was sick of the Congress saying that we are so cool because we are rich, sophisticated and corrupt. But she's not, because she's not rich, sophisticated, but she's corrupt. So I wouldn't vote for Mayawati today. If I can't argue with anyone saying that Mayawati is the best candidate. I know she's not. But at that time, I wish a couple of 100,000 people had voted for her. And bloody she had, if you read the book Behenji by Ajoy Bose, her coming to Chief Minister was a bloody miracle, yeah. And it fucking jolted UP like nothing as before. We needed something like that. So right now, if you don't like the way the country is heading, I don't see anyone even close to Arvind being able to take. And also not just the, वो है ना वो शाहरुख खान की फिल्म बनिए का दिमाग और मियाँ भाई की डेयरिंग.
Yeah.
It applies for him. He will take on anything. Like I don't give a fuck. So that is the reason I think he's the best bet. But yeah, I mean, other than that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with you about how voters should not, be fixed on one party and how we should be prudent. But I'm also reminded of something. Was it Hannah Arendt who said this? I forget who. But those who vote for the lesser evil should remember that they are still voting for evil. So, my kind of pessimism runs much deeper. I just think that, like you, I will oppose whichever party is in power because, that is kind of the nature of the beast. Let's move on to talking about the media, and I'll end the show by asking about your experiences of Highway on a Plate because, you intrigued me a lot with the little that you did say about it. But like when I look at the media, one of the things that I think is really exciting for creators of any kind today is that when I look back at the 1990s, creators were dependent on intermediaries. So if I was a writer, I could not reach my audience directly. My audience may value my work because time is money. They're spending time reading or listening or whatever, but I have no way to capture that. I have to go to intermediaries like a Times of India or a news channel or whatever, give my work to those intermediaries, they collate eyeballs, they get advertising, I get a tiny chunk of that. I think that whole model has broken down completely, as you have also, mentioned earlier and experienced and in fact led the way for that. The model is broken down in two ways. One, I think that the way people discover content, consume content, filter content has changed completely. But I also think that advertising model is completely broken. Like John Wanamaker once famously said, half the money I spent on advertising is wasted. I don't know which half. I think today the percentage is like way more than that. All these metrics which, publications used to get ads are basically just being gamed.
Right.
It is a mug's game.
Sure.
And I think consumers are now more and more reaching creators directly, and creators are able to not only build communities of their audiences but also monetize that because, and especially what I feel is that the more you provide value to the consumer, the greater the level of engagement. So it is not just the total eyeballs that matter, it is a degree of engagement. Like a News Laundry support reader would 100% feel much more engaged and feel much more ownership than say a Times of India reader. Right. Tell me a little bit about your experiences of this, because you are essentially, the first pioneer of this kind of thing where you have decided कि advertising जाए बाहर में, we'll take the support of those we serve, and that's working out. So tell me, I'm very fascinated to know more about how your thinking on this evolved and how it's panned out.
So I won't go on too long on this because there are just so many angles. I've lived with this for so long and learned so much, it could take hours, but I will say a few basic things. One is you have to find like you said, your immediate tribe has to be very committed and convinced of what you're doing, because they will carry your word faster than you will carry your word further. I will not get into too much detail in that, but giants like Google and Facebook need to be controlled and regulated. They need to be broken up. But how do you break up something like Facebook? And Vivek Kaul and I discussed this, and usually wonder how, because it's a network. How can you break up a network? It's not like big oil that you invite into fire for. But the power they have is deeply, deeply worrying. And they can shut you and me out if they choose to. Which is why regulation is an important aspect. Which is why I believe we live in a post-ideological age. I find the whole commentary around, people who identify themselves as communists or socialist as idiotic as people who identify themselves as capitalists, because I shouldn't use the word like idiotic, but unwise. It is not a thought-through position, because if you look at history, political history and economic history of the world, I mean, some of the most capitalist countries, so to speak, have the biggest socialist programs, whether it is, the US.
But the argument then would be that you shouldn't call them capitalist, and vice versa on the other side.
Exactly, on the other side, which is, you live on, what's wrong with you? I'm blanking out. US, what do you get? You get, after the Great Depression, the fatigue of talking about 3 hours is completely, the big deal. What is it? Big deal? New Deal.
The New Deal.
The New Deal, and giving everyone that basic survival unemployment that you live on. In Singapore, the housing that you get is like way subsidized. And there's no place like Singapore where everything is like market, capitalist. Look at China, so to see communist state or. So I just think that the regulation that is required. So I believe regulation is something that is very important. But what you call regulation is what is like this whole debate around news media. Should you not be regulated? Of course we should regulate, but who says we aren't regulated? The way it is worded, that there is no regulation, there is a regulation. We do abide by laws. We have to, there is some compliance we have to do. So what is regulation is important. Now that is a very important part in the world going forward, with people like Google and Facebook coming as powerful as they are. The honeymoon that you and I are going through right now can really be brought to a very rude and abrupt end. I think Germany is going down the right way. I think other countries also have to think through how you control these guys, because they are cornering the growth of the internet when it comes to the financial aspect or the commerce of it, is being cornered by 4 or 5 big guys. That is not healthy for any society. So let's put that aside. That is all I have to say about this aspect. And it's a very important aspect of the growth. But when it comes to what can you and I do, identify that tribe, convince people. And I've also realized that in the first stage, people don't identify with a brand or a mission. They identify with the person. Do they like Amit? Do they like Madhu? Do they like Abhinandan? And that's also true for politics today in the digital age, which is why this whole lament of, it's a one-man party. Dude, if you understand politics and messaging, that is how it will be, at least in the foreseeable future. At least as far as the media consumption and consumer behavior of voters is right now. Your party will not be bigger than your leader. And no matter what noble intentions aap may have been started by, that we are against central command, jo bhi kehte the na, wo high command culture, you cannot do without that. Your party will not survive for 1 year. Similarly, stage 1 has to be person. People have to like you. So you have to put out what you believe. Your message is you. And then they say, okay, what this guy is saying we agree with or disagree with. Like a lot of people in the beginning, and now I've stopped getting that hate mail and that hate tweets. We thought you were a good boy. Why? Because in 2012, my primary attack was at Manmohan and gang. Now it is at your boy. Now you hate me. But at that time you liked me. अच्छा है, enthusiastic है, लड़ता है सबसे, कांग्रेस से लड़ रहा है, ठीक है, तो सपोर्ट आया, सब्सक्राइबर्स आए. फिर मैसेज सुना मेरा, फिर मैंने ट्वीट किया कि भाई, if I had to choose between two and a gun was put to my head, of course I choose the Congress because I hate religious bigotry. Oh my God, he's like this. Hello, welcome to the party. Of course, anyone sensible will be. Now the next stage for growth, opinions will not get you scale. If I had to, for you, a single podcast, if Abhinandan is doing a podcast, I can make a living doing a podcast. I can get a few hundred, couple of thousand subscribers. That's enough to take care of my needs. But if I want to do reporting, I want to make a difference in the news world, you cannot be the only star. You have to, over time, take the backseat. You have to become the sidey. And you have to have a bunch of people who are really good at what they do. and are passionate as you. They aren't there for the anchor banna chahta hu. You know that many people anchor banna chahta hu. Sala, this bloody Narsimhan guy, he was from Mr. Model or something, but आपका क्या था, आपका pursuit क्या था, आप क्या कर रहे हो? कभी आपने interest भी था इसमें? You know, have 4-5 such people who are as driven by the mission as you are. Because you cannot do it. So, you know, we have such a phenomenal team, you know, our design team, yeah, you know how committed they are. They're so young. And they have like, there's a raid, should we come to office? I said, kids, you stay home, man. Bro, should we come? Why have they not named us? Bloody, they are willing to jump into the fight with you, yeah. And they're 24, I'm fucking 47, yeah. You know, have that team. And you'll go through mistakes, yeah. You'll hire 5 lemons, yeah, who are just there for the ride. And then when they realize, dude, these guys mean business, then I'm quitting. Why I'm joining Times, yeah. I was like, congratulations. Like, why would you even come here if that was your intention? But most importantly, opinions will not, for what I am doing, it has to be ground reports. The crux of growth is ground reports. First Post had more opinion pieces than anybody does. No one's going to pay read First Post. Nobody. Your ground reporting has to be of a certain caliber if one has to grow. And podcasts are very important because podcasts are very important for your primary tribe. Your primary tribe likes the sound of your message, of your passion.
Podcasts are high engagement.
Absolutely. So that and we started podcasts, you know, before anybody had, because I was addicted to podcasts from the mid 2000s.
Wow.
So I was just addicted to the NPR podcast when that bloody Lehman broke and they started Planet Money. I was addicted to that podcast, and I bloody haven't missed an episode in the last so many years. And I was like, podcast chalu karna yaar. And I think we started as in 2013, 14. I forget when we started a podcast. And I was like, why the fuck should I start a podcast? I'm like, dude, it is the most highest engagement thing. And sure it was. And when we put it behind the paywall, you know, that's when we saw the biggest spurt in subscribers back then. When we just had 3 or 4 ground reporters. Today we have, maybe 10, 11, 12 ground reporters. And we want to take this number up to 50 ground reporters. We want to have the network of reporters who are passionate, driven, and not influenced by advertisers.
Fabulous. But my one comment on that issue about, you know, a handful of these networks owning the internet is that, yes, I think that's an existential threat to all of us, and I'm incredibly worried about it. But I also feel that we should not reflexively think of state coercion as the answer. Mm-hmm. If state coercion is to be the answer, then it's people like Modi who could be deciding, or people like Trump. And so I'm just really wary of that. That fine, you want to regulate the media, but who's regulating you? You know, any dispensation that really regulates you through the power of the state will crush dissent in some way or the other.
Sure.
And that's kind of what...
I mean, yeah, that's a more complicated discussion that, you know,
we can leave for some other day.
Leave for some other day, but there's an inevitability to governments.
Yeah.
And there's an inevitability to governments framing regulatory frameworks.
So you want to influence that as much as possible in the limited way.
Now how you go about that is a different, but at least in the current state of how things are run in the world, you can't get around that problem. And one thing that I've learned from people like Arvind especially is that identify the problem that you can't change. And then fucking set that aside as a given. This is the given we're living with. Now what can I change to get to where I want to get to? Government's framing policy for anything is a given. How we get about influencing that is what we can do.
Well said. You know, you mentioned highway on a plate and all that. I won't ask you to elaborate on it at too much length. But I have a broader question that also kind of touches upon that experience, which is that you spoke that while shooting Highway on a Plate, you visited every state in this country, which is phenomenal. Now, both of us grew up in little privileged bubbles. Over time, we came out of it little bits at a time, and our eyes opened, and you see something new, and a layer falls off somewhere, and a veil falls off somewhere else, and you see something in a way that you didn't see before. And in your case, one as a general thing, you know, when you look back as the young you, the 20-year-old you, and you look at you today, what are the layers that you think fell off? In what way are you kind of different from that? And would this experience of having taken you to so many states for this show, and would also the experience of so much ground reporting, actually, getting out in the field, and, even though a lot of your ground reporting may have been back in the day, how did this make you see the country differently? Like, if there's a young person who has the same kind of background as you and I do, but they're young, they're 22, what do you want to tell them? That, bro, the world is not how you see it, but what else would you add to that?
I mean, there are many things, but I mean, maybe a couple of things that are most important learnings for me were that, I had this cockiness and arrogance that many people have because, I come from a home that is very well read. I have read so many books. I went to a good school. I passed exams fairly effortlessly. I never owned a textbook in my life, and yet I'd pass. I may not top. And people would... So, you have that cockiness. The one thing that I learned through my travels with Having a Plate, the documentary films I shot, Arvind, everybody, the people who are in the gig know the gig best. So, which is why central planning is something that I'm completely against. The whole Swaraj model. And I'll illustrate this by one specific example, because while I was shooting Having a Plate, I was also flirting with activism at the time, quote unquote.
Again, you called yourself a journalist earlier, and you've spoken about flirting with activism right now. Great.
So, you're exhausting me to submission.
This is the whole reason of 4-hour podcast. You tire the person out and then they speak the truth. I'm kidding. Carry on.
But, we were in the Northeast. I think this must have been maybe somewhere near Nagaland, or I think this was in a village called Thembang, if I'm not wrong. And, have you traveled to Arunachal, Nagaland, etc.? Have you driven?
No, sadly not.
It's really, now, of course, when you go into Arunachal, that you have to stop to show your inner line permit, etc. Now, there's lots of shops there. When I had gone for the first time, it was like, you go there and there's this deep green river and lush forest, like Jurassic Park. It's a very dramatic entry. And then, as you go further, because there are clouds very low now, you like driving in and out of clouds. Oh. It's really, the visibility can be very low. And the weather isn't that great all the time. So, and in the evening when you're not shooting, you sit with your village. I was like, what would you want over here if you were given the funds in this local area? They said a cinema hall. Someone said a hall where we can have marriages, parties, dance parties, music, wahan kafi hai. I was like, dude, seriously, this is why, central planning may be a good idea. Yahan par, canal banao, bijli banao, sala, what do they want? A cinema hall. They want a hall for parties. And then when you stay and talk, you understand why. They said, because in our village, if any kid wants to watch a movie or wants any entertainment, they have to go to, depending on which village you're in, Kohima or if you're in Shillong. And you've seen the roads here. We lose whatever X amount of kids every year to accidents. If they had a place here, they wouldn't drive fucking 40 kilometers away to watch a film or to go for a party or to play in a band. There should be one close by. And I'm like, would a central planner here saying that, in the Northeast, in these 8 villages, what should he put? Would anyone say cinema hall? No, man. Would they say a bloody hall for music system and a stage where people can perform? No. They say khamba lagao, bamboo lagao, whatever the fuck lagao. No, those guys know best here. And when you sit and talk to them, you get... So one learning was that, lovely story, which you might like. I know your listeners would have said this on a Having a Plate podcast. There's a place near Rajasthan called Sendada. It has the best dahi bhallas in the country. Now, before Pragati Pradhan was demolished, there used to be an annual food festival there, and prizes were given. That most, best chaat. These guys are winning best dahi bhalla for years. So we were supposed to go to Jaipur. From Jaipur, we were going to, via Jaisalmer, ahead, all that. But we had to make this detour to Sendra for dahi bhallas because our research showed that there's this place called Sendra. I was like, dude, we're going to take 100 kilometer detour for dahi bhallas. Like one sequence. And as a producer, you're thinking, is it worth the trip? So I was in any case in a very negative frame of mind. I was like, how special can a dahi bhalla be? So while I was sitting there and we were, waiting for the shot to be set up, I was telling Rocky, yaar, bloody fucking what, 2 hour detour for dahi bhalla. Like, how special can a dahi bhalla be? A dahi bhalla is a dahi bhalla, yeah. The guy heard me. Now your cocky arrogance, city slicker. इसको अंग्रेजी नहीं आती होगी. उसको तो सारे आती थी. Although he was dressed in his, he said, आपने कहा ये स्कॉच विस्की के बारे में बोल रहा है. विस्की तो विस्की है. स्कॉच वाली क्यों खास है और यहाँ हमारी वाली क्यों अच्छी नहीं है? मैंने कहा बताइए. He says, क्योंकि स्कॉटलैंड की जो स्ट्रीम है था उसका पानी खास होता है, उनकी हवा खास होती है, वो जिन लकड़ी में रखते हैं वो लकड़ी खास होती है, तो वो टेस्ट आपको यहाँ मिल ही नहीं सकता. हमारी जो गाय है जिससे हम दूध निकालेंगे, उसका जो दही बनता है इस हवा में बनता है. जो घास वो खाती है, जो हम पानी यूज करते हैं. आप जानते हैं जब आप आपके दिल्ली आते हैं प्रगति मैदान दही बल्ले बनाने, हम 3 टैंकर यहाँ से लाते हैं. आपके पानी से नहीं बनाते दही बल्ले हम. अगर स्कॉच विस्की खास हो सकती है, दही बल्ला खास क्यों नहीं हो सकता? आई वाज लाइक फक मैन, दैट मेक्स सेंस. ही सेज, आप यहाँ से मैं आपको बता दूंगा हम क्या क्या डालते हैं, कितना डालते हैं, दिल्ली में बना के दिखा दो. ना आपके पास हमारा पानी है, ना मेरी गाय है, ना मेरी घास है, आपसे बनेगा ही नहीं. I said, okay, fuck you, Niku. You fucking talk too much. Shut the fuck up.
Yeah. How were the dahi ballas?
Outstanding, dude. And I'm not a dahi bhalla guy. And I was like, fuck, you're right, man. There is something about this which is, I can't get in Delhi. And I mean, other than the film that I want to make, one thing that I want to do is with Rocky, Mayur and Prashad, I want to write a book on Highway and Plate. We have about 12,000 photographs. And Prashant and Rocky are photograph kidas. They would fucking... I'm an impatient guy when I'm shooting. And photographers are impatient. They're saying, wait, yaar, abhi yaar, click. I said, we have to make 500 kilometers today. We have to... Ek aur photograph. Click. Fuck. They would just maro my bund by bloody taking pictures. But now I see why. Because we have got pictures from Kashmir to Kanyakumari, from Kutch to fucking Arunachal. Like, I have a big poster in my house, which has about 100 pictures, this size. It starts off on the left corner with Kashmir, ends with Kanyakumari, and there's every state in the middle. And like from Somnath Temple to Ajmer to bloody Nagaland to Tawang Monastery to Leh. That is one mission that I want, that this book has stories of, and I'm not saying this in the chest thumping that I love my India, Subhash Ghai or Akshay Kumar way, but the magic that being out there does. Probably this will happen to any country, but our country is very diverse. I think there's one cliche about India, that is that everything you say about India, the opposite is also true.
Yeah, exactly.
We are extremely kind, we are very cruel. What Veer Das has just said, what he's getting a lot of flack for.
Yeah.
He's making a different point, but everything I say about India is the opposite also very true. We are extremely cruel and callous because of how we see lynchings happen in front of us. Like, in a country which is not considered so civilized, US, matlab, even if a guy who looks like me with a dadi, brown skin and all, if I'm suffering with someone, I'm like, dude, you okay? Can I help you? Like in Germany, yeah, this guy really poached my cab. The guys in line said, we're really sorry, Germany's not like this, that guy's not from here. And they got me a cab. Because I was standing in line, the line was behind me, and some guy just came and took the cab, yeah. Would that happen here? No. And we said, we are more civilized? No. But yes, here, when, I was unwell, bloody people who you can't stand will come and give you blood, and people who we don't see eye to eye to, we fight so much, yeah. Political, we are on opposite sides. Prashant is, Sushant's brother. Sushant Sarin, you see him on Times often. He is as right as they come. And I remember we used to fight so much. And when I needed blood, he was there. He says, dude, I'm like 100 kilos, take 2 liters from me, It's very complicated. And if that is something that I want to do, maybe, if I live to be 60, 65, maybe I'll spend 5 years finally putting all these pictures together and writing my travels and learnings from people. Like this guy who used to run this small dosa shop between, where do all the South Indian chefs come from? What's that? Udupi to Mangalore, I think that was the stretch. He runs a small dosa shop. He didn't even have 2 clothes to cover his body. Yeah. We were a crew of 10. We must have eaten like 500 worth of dosa. We said, eat, okay. And we had a policy, we'd pay, otherwise we will not review. Because you can't go eat for free and say that we... So, we tell all the dhaba owners, restaurants that, and they'd understand. All the hospitality, because after Rocky Mayur became big names, people would want to see first reviews. So we said, and people would say, "Hum to lenge nahi." Maine kaha, then we won't feature you. Then they say, okay, fine, take the money. This guy said, I won't take money. I said, dude, you can't not take money. There are fucking 10 of us. Your hole in the wall is worth less than one wheel of our car. So please, no. And there was a language barrier because then I usually pull out my trump card. Then we won't feature you on the show because that's our policy. He says, don't feature me. He said, I don't want to be featured in your show. It's late at night. You've come here. I enjoyed talking to you. I've fed you dosas. I'm not going to take money from you. If that means you don't feature me, don't feature me. You fucking meet magical people who have nothing and will give you everything. Yeah. So, and you come across dicks also. So yeah, someday.
Yeah, I mean, that cliche is one, in fact, I keep repeating about the opposite also being true in India. I'd done an episode with JP Narayan where I put to him, I mentioned what an illiberal society India had. And of course, I meant things like how we treat women, caste, all of that. And he said at the same time, it's very liberal in some ways. You look at the cuisine, look at the food which you ate. Yeah. Everything and every meal you must have eaten has really come from all over the place. And just to add something to this Dahi Balla angle, one angle he probably forgot is that, for example, why do people eat so much tomato juice when they're flying? Because at that altitude, your taste buds taste, and tomato juice tastes better for that way, which is why they sell more of it up there than down here. So maybe there's something to that as well.
Yeah.
And and I, of course, as you would know, I have a deep distaste for central planning, but that is one way in which Modi ji and Nehru ji are exactly the same. Great belief in doing everything from the top down. So I've really taken enough of your time, and you've been very kind with your time and insight. So I'm going to ask you one final question, which I can't help but ask, which I ask all my guests. I'd like you to recommend some books for my listeners to read. Books that might have shaped you, changed you in some way, that are dear to you, or even books where you want to stand on a soapbox and shout, read this book, please read this book.
Okay, that's a difficult one because there's so many. And also, what phase of life are we talking about? Like, I would not recommend, Guha's India After Gandhi or many of his books, because I think because his wealth of knowledge is so immense, he can tell you a story that would ordinarily take someone 100,000 words. He can tell it to you in 10,000. So India After Gandhi can tell you a lot about the odds that India was shaped in a fairly, think about how big the country is, keeping that in mind. So, but I would not recommend that to someone who's in class 10, 11, 12, or even first year college. Maybe you should read that if you're in your 20s or 30s. I would not recommend Thomas Hardy to anyone who's maybe mid to late 20s. Or
let me give a twist to that. What would 47-year-old Niku recommend to the 20-year-old Niku?
Oh, dear God. That PG Woodhouse is going over your head, so fucking don't waste your time by reading them just because your mother says they're funny.
I love PG Woodhouse, but continue.
Yeah. I would recommend, honestly, I read a lot for my age, so I actually wouldn't. But what I will say is that books that have completely knocked my socks off is M and the Big Whom by
Jerry Pinto.
Jerry. I think, and I've read some other books of Jerry after that, which are not that great, but don't hold me to it. But I will hazard saying that that's probably the best book by an Indian author I have ever read. His mastery over the language, his craft, and not just that, even Rushdie has. Rushdie is very good with language. And I would also recommend Shame, highly recommend Shame. For me, it's better than Midnight's Children. But he's able to communicate the most profound emotions in 4 words. How the fuck does he do that? And that story, it is so honest, it is so identifiable. You can see many of your life instances there. So I'd say M and the Big Whom is a must read for anyone. When I read it, and when you said, no, wait, I read it, I closed it. Next day, I bought 5 copies. And whoever I met in the next week, I said, hey, read this book. So that, very few books have had that effect on me. M and the Big Whom is one. I loved Shame by Rushdie. I think Thomas Hardy should be read when you're in young 20s. It has an idyllic romance in it. And I think when you're that age, you should be a romantic. Fuck politics. It'll come to you eventually. Think of the romance and the beautiful things in the world. So in your early 20s, I would say, I loved, it was panned by critics. I loved The Ground Beneath Her Feet by Rushdie. I even liked Shalimar the Clown a lot. I loved Brighton Rock by Graham Greene. I mean, it's like a punch in the gut. You know, that like the darkness that he creates. Sala tumhe depression ho jata hai, right? He creates. That's the thing about books. There's so many dozens and hundreds of them. Like for me, The Great Gatsby was like a wonderful book, and it was so thin. It's the only book that I finished because it was thin, and I was on a flight and I flipped it over and started reading it again because and then later so many things fall into place because then you're curious about Fitzgerald. Why did he write it? What was this Gilded Age all about? What was he commenting on? But today, to people your and my age whose eyes are getting weaker, I recommend podcasts because they are a fantastic way to learn. And Real Dictators is one that I highly recommend. It is just phenomenal. It's very well. And also, before I finish, I must plug News Laundry. And I will say, all for Amit's listeners, mail me at abhinandansekhri@gmail.com. I repeat, abhinandansekhri@gmail.com. And we'll get you 25% off, and we'll also send you a gift hamper from News Laundry. If you're in India, I can't ship it overseas. But if you give me an Indian address, I'll ship it. So you can mail me, and we'll give you a 25% discount. But just you have to say that you came through Amit's show, because otherwise I'll get other mails also. So yeah.
Yeah, so kindly do that. And even if you don't want the 25% discount, even if you're abroad, if you've reached this far in the show, it's because you care, because you're engaged. So please do subscribe to News Laundry. It's I love the work you guys do.
Thanks, Amit.
And thank you so much for, coming here, being so patient, sharing your insights.
No, my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. And it was wonderful having you at the Media Rumble a couple of years back. Hopefully when you get physical again, you'll come and we have a lot more exciting guests and a lot more podcasts. So, and thank you for your show and reinventing the slow, long form which people had abandoned. I'm so glad that you're doing this. Thank you.
Thank you. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, head on over to newslaundry.com/subscription and pay to keep news free. You can follow Abhinandan on Twitter at Abhinandan Sekhri. That's his name minus the I at the end. So it's Abhinandan Sekhri, but no I. So Abhinandan Sekhri. I'll just link it from the show notes. You can also follow me on Twitter at Amit Verma. Again, there's no I at the end. It's AmitVarma. You can browse past episodes of The Seen and the Unseen at seenunseen.in. Thank you for listening. Did you enjoy this episode of The Seen and the Unseen? If so, would you like to support the production of the show? You can go over to seenunseen.in/support and contribute any amount you like to keep this podcast alive and kicking. Thank you.